My wife returned from a work retreat with a hickey. She swears it's a bug bite, but I'm not convinced. I'm at a loss. How do I move forward? I'm 27 million, in a fight with my wife, 28 million. We've had fights before but not this bad. I'm at a loss on how to proceed. For context, we're college sweethearts married for almost 6 years. We have a daughter, 4F. Our relationship was never perfect or without challenges. We've faced some family opposition with cultural differences, but we've made it work. She's my first love and my best friend. My wife works in a corporation. Her job has annual work retreats that last for about a week. This year was in Vegas. I usually arrange my work schedule and tag along with her, and we make our own trip out of it. We couldn't this year. Our daughter gets major anxiety traveling long distances. We're working on it, but she wasn't budging, and we decided to choose our battles. So I stood behind and held down the fort at home. The change of plans was a bummer because the trip was part of us reconnecting as both a couple and as a family. My wife's work hours have taken a toll, and her work-life balance leaves much to be desired. We entertained the idea of her skipping the retreat. Attendance is optional, but it's generally frowned upon if you don't, and my wife's making connections in her field. She grew increasingly weird. We have a system if either of us is away for extended periods. We keep in contact. For the first day or so, she was herself, but she grew distant. I'd even text her about important stuff and be left on read while she claimed she never saw my text. Whenever we talked, she was rushing me or our daughter off the phone. These were all times she wasn't involved in retreat activities. We were supposed to have a mini birthday celebration for our daughter over FaceTime. Our daughter was excited. It was something my wife promised her because the retreat overlapped her actual birthday. But my wife backed out because she had people up to her room after a seminar. It was like she wanted my permission to break her promise to our daughter. I told her I wasn't offering that nor making her keep her word. She said I wasn't being fair, and this was a networking opportunity. They were business-oriented and wouldn't understand her stepping away for family time. I said her decision is her decision, but she'd have to explain it to our daughter. She promised her that she'd rain-check the following day. Our daughter didn't understand and cried. My wife ended up hanging up and leaving me to comfort our daughter alone. That whole incident rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like it. She didn't keep her word for the rain check either. She was documenting the retreat on social media. One coworker, 23 million, was almost in every pic video attached to her hip. In one pic he had his arm too comfortably around her IMO. He's a recent hire in my wife's department. She was asked to oversee him. I don't like the guy. He doesn't know boundaries. Once, in response to a work assignment, he texted my wife that she's exactly the kind of woman he needs to keep him in check. My wife had brushed it off. She feels bad for him because he's not fitting in. She took him under her wing during his first retreat with the team. If I'd questioned, she'd say she was tired or networking. There was always something. But I've seen her at these retreats. This wasn't like her. She was just off. The day before her return home, she complained about a bruise on her neck. She stressed it was a bug bite. I didn't actually see the bruise until she came home. I instantly thought it was a full-on hickey. She kind of brushed it off after making a big deal of it over the phone. I didn't push because our daughter was present. But when I was able to confront her, she clung to her bug bite claim. When I kept pushing, she asked what I was trying to imply. I outright said I believed she had a hickey, and I didn't believe she was being honest with me. We had it out then. She was offended and pissed at the accusation. Infidelity has always been a sore topic. Her family has a history of infidelity. So we had a pretty bad fight, and she accused me of looking to pick a fight due to the incident with our daughter's birthday. I told her it had nothing to do with that and everything to do with a hickey on her neck. The fight ended in an impasse. We're still not recovered. She swears it's a bug bite. But I'm not convinced. I've always trusted my wife. I never doubted her, but this bruise doesn't look like a bug bite. It looks like a hickey. I only feel more strongly when I consider how distant and weird she was during the Vegas retreat. Now she's been wearing turtlenecks ever since, and we're caught between arguing and her dousing our daughter and me with affection. Communication usually prevails for us, but not now. I think my accusation pushed us to a new level of argument. I'm at a loss here. I really need outside perspectives. How do I move forward? Comments. Comment 1. I have been to Vegas and never saw a single bug. It is like dry as fuck, desert-like. Not saying they aren't there, but it's not like she was in the Mayan Riviera. This is all super sus. Don't let her gaslight you. She clearly got a hickey, which is dumb as fuck in itself, probably from the idiot who is too inexperienced to know what he was doing, and preemptively came up with an excuse knowing what it would look like. Out of character behavior. Neglecting her daughter. New young guy hanging off her, that is in photos she knew you could end up seeing. What about what you couldn't see? Eyebrow raising texts. Comment 2. I used to travel regularly to Vegas several times a year for about 8 years, worked for the gambling industry. I have never seen a bug anywhere in the vicinity of Las Vegas. What I did see though was a lot of drunks and infidelity. I'm not saying she cheated. But he's right to be suspicious. Comment 3. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I've never gotten a bug bite that looked like a hickey. Did she show you her phone or provide any proof that could support her innocence or just dismiss you? The extra affection is a common move from guilt-ridden cheaters. Even if we stretch the imagination and believe it is a big bite, she wasn't acting trustworthy, nor was she a good mother while she was in Vegas, and she needs to address and correct that. OP. No, I haven't had access to her phone. We usually have an open phone policy, but it's not something we've ever really done. I'm sure it'll be another argument. Yeah, you don't get to disconnect from being a parent, especially to a minor, for extended holidays. You certainly don't ghost them on their birthday and when you promise to do something special for them and got the child excited about it, or hang up on them while they're crying. I'm not insecure. My wife's gone on retreats before. We both work outside the home and have the care for our daughter. So it's not an imbalance. My wife's work-life balance is out of sorts. She's in the company of other adults plenty. I've been with my wife on these retreats and other social events. I know how she is. She was off this entire trip, nor was it appreciated her entertaining a coworker who ignores boundaries, having his arm wrapped around her waist like he was claiming her or something. I trusted her when she said she had a bug bite. I got things to help her treat it when returned. It was only after I saw the bruise in person that there was no mistaking it was a hickey for me, and I questioned her on it. Update. 7 days later. I, 27 million, wanted to give an update and thank everyone who reached out. The outside perspectives helped. Things are a roller coaster. I'm trying to process. It took a while for my wife, 28F, and me to have any real conversation about the bruise on her neck. We were stuck between arguing and her showering our daughter, 4F, and me with affection. I rarely saw the bruise because she was turtlenecked up. But I did note the healing process from reddish purple to yellow. There wasn't any more discussion about the Vegas retreat. She made it clear she was done talking about it and that she shouldn't need to defend herself to her husband. I told her she could do whatever she wanted, but I was done being treated like an idiot, and I wasn't sharing a bed with someone I couldn't trust. So I moved into the guest room. Communication stopped. The silences were palpable. Even our daughter noticed. I'm not proud of that. I try keeping her out of fights. My wife came to the guest room one night and asked if we could talk. I could tell she'd been crying. She said she hated the way things were between us. She felt she was losing me either way. I told her I needed complete honesty. She confessed she hooked up with that coworker, 23 million, on our daughter's birthday. The hickey was from him. She was lost in the heat of the moment and didn't realize he was sucking so hard on her neck. By her account, they made out while doing some on top of the clothes stuff, and then he went down on her. It stopped there because he called her by a nickname that I affectionately call her. It snapped her back to the reality of her actions. She went to splash water on her face and saw the hickey. The guy made light of it and made a joke about the hickey being her souvenir. She blew up on him and kicked him out of her suite. Part of the reason she was avoiding me was out of guilt. She said she's coming clean because she doesn't want to hide things anymore. I asked her why she cheated. What was it about that guy she deemed worth risking everything? She claimed it wasn't him specifically, nor is she unhappy with our marriage. She doesn't really know how to explain it, but a part of her feels broken. The more she looks in the mirror, the more she sees her dad, 57 million. A cycle of being consumed with work, distant from the child, and the infidelity he put her mom, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, through. She said her family never talked about anything openly and how when she was growing up, my mother-in-law never addressed anything with her. I said her parents didn't make her cheat. She chose to party up with a guy who constantly disrespected our relationship. These were all her decisions, and she at any point could have chosen our family. She agreed. She wants to blame her parents but realizes this is on her. She apologized for cheating and for entertaining the guy's advances. She said she'll do whatever it takes to repair. Go to HR, quit her job, counseling, anything. She wants to make everything right. I told her I don't know what right looks like or if that's possible for us anymore. I knew we had our problems, but I thought there wasn't anything we couldn't talk out. She insisted we still could talk it out. We didn't have to give up on us. She tried giving this rally cry for our relationship, but I felt very numb. I said I didn't recognize her. Not just the betrayal of our vows but also how she treated our daughter. She's like a stranger. She feels she failed as a wife and mom, but she loves us both beyond words and wants our life together and our family intact. I told her I couldn't give her the answer she wanted and thought we needed to separate and reevaluate. She didn't want separation. She felt we should stay together in our home, but I told her a separation was happening. Either she was leaving the home or I was with our daughter. She consented to leaving so as to best not uproot our daughter so much. She asked for our daughter not to be taken away from her. My wife's staying with my in-laws. I know that's difficult in itself because she doesn't have the best relationship with her parents. One of the hardest parts is the shift for our daughter. Right now, she believes her mom's just busy with work per usual. She hasn't questioned it too much. My mother-in-law called the other day. She made no excuses for my wife, but she's advocating for us to work through it. She told me times when she heard my wife describe me as the anchor she always wanted. She believes there's something worth fighting for if I'm open. Despite some family opposition we faced throughout our relationship, my mother-in-law was always a supporter of us. I'm even more at a loss. I never imagined this kind of betrayal from my wife. She was my safe place. I feel numb yet broken. I'm in love with her. That hasn't changed. But I don't see myself, her, our relationship, or our family the same. Everything's more tense because it's fresh. I think this period of separation is for the best. I'm not sure about divorce. I haven't let myself fully go there. I'm not set either way. I don't know where things go from here, but I'm focusing on our daughter and taking things one step at a time. I feel that's all I can do right now. Thanks again to everyone for the support, it's much appreciated. TLDR update 4. My wife returned from a work retreat in Vegas with a hickey on her neck. She swears it's a bug bite, but I'm not convinced. I only feel more strongly when I consider how distant and weird she was during the retreat. We're stuck between arguing and her dousing our daughter and me with affection. I'm at a loss. I really need outside perspectives. How do I move forward? Comments. Comment 1. Do you think she is still trickling through you? How would the coworker know your nickname for her? Good luck onwards. OP. Also think about this part of your comment whenever your wife tells you she is sorry. Cheating on you is one thing, but your wife's behavior towards her daughter is sickening. Comment 2. I was just on a work trip with a coworker who has a couple of little kids similar in age to OP's. He had arranged his travel times to make it easier on them and went back to the hotel to call them every night. Nothing about how the wife is acting is normal or okay. Comment 3. They didn't stop until he came inside your wife. You know that, right? Comment 4. She had plenty of time to craft a story where she was less offensive. He went down on her only? Okay. Comment 5. Yeah, that's a convenient story. It's bad but offers a glimpse of it's not so bad she didn't really do anything to him. That's just not believable to me. Also the MIL is not your friend here OP, she's trying to help her child. Again, don't settle for this treatment. My husband's affair with his brother's ex led to him leaving, marrying her, and abandoning our kids. I filed for custody and child support. I've, 37F, been with my husband, 44M, for 17 years. We have kids, a dog, and we used to own a business together. He has this friend, who happens to be his little brother's ex-girlfriend, 30F. She's been in and out of our lives since she broke up with my Bill over 12 years ago. Over the last 4 years or so, she's been constantly messaging my husband. She never sends me a message, unless my husband tells her that he's not home and she's on her way. Happened only once in 4 years. She's engaged and has a baby on the way. Both my husband and his friends say they have a brother-sister relationship. My kids don't like her or her kid. Her kid is 7 years younger than our youngest child. They feel like they have to babysit her when she comes over. This is what bothers me about their relationship. I am never included in their conversations online, even when she invites herself over. My husband once told his brother that he thought that she was hot and if he was younger and single he would try to date her. My Bill sent me a message to warn me about their relationship. When I spoke to my husband about it, he laughed it off and told me his brother was jealous. During an intimate moment my husband told me that she was the only person he would ever ask to do a threesome with us. That was never discussed between us before, not even the option of a threesome. When she comes over, she barely speaks directly to me, always to my husband. I have to butt into the conversation for her to even acknowledge me. I'm tired of feeling like the third wheel in their friendship. Last year he gave me one of his old cell phones because mine had broken. He hadn't logged out of his Messenger account so I used it to my advantage and read their messages at the time. He had admitted to her that he had told his brother that she was hot and that if he was younger and single he would date her. He then told her I wasn't home when he said that and I didn't know exactly what he said. Her response was to send him this emoji laughing face. Ever since, I feel like they both occasionally disrespect me in their conversations. All he does is talk about her. Often. He never makes her wait when she texts him. Yet sometimes when I text him, he takes a half hour to answer me. So tell me, would I be an asshole if I told him that he had to choose between his relationship with me and his friend? Update, 2 months later, we've had several talks over the last few weeks. At first he wanted to work things out. As a matter of fact, he says he never meant any of it and he keeps apologizing for breaking my trust. Now he's being a plain dick. Then he flipped and decided that since I don't want to work on things, he left for his brother's house. He hasn't seen our kids in the past month. He talks to them on the phone, but that's about it. So far, to piss me off, he's cut mine and the kids' cell phone service, so I had to get us new SIM cards for that because otherwise we wouldn't have phones. He's refused to pay anything in regards to school supplies and uniforms. He doesn't want to give me a dime. He hasn't done his taxes this year, which means I won't get any family allowance, CCTB, which cuts me $1,800 a month on my budget. I was able to sign the kids up for a local school supply distribution. The only thing they don't help with is the uniforms. Thankfully only my older two need uniforms. My oldest has some old uniform shirts that will be passed down to my other child. Which means my daughter will be wearing her older brother's shirts. She's really annoyed by the situation and has been giving me lots of attitude about it, but at the moment I can't afford t-shirts at $35 a piece with the school's logo on it, so she has no choice. Unfortunately, uniforms are mandatory. I spoke to his friend as well. I told her everything that was going on. He told her he left me because I cheated on him, which isn't true, and she blames herself for what happened. Personally, I just think she was putting on a show. I haven't spoken to her since. If you ask me, I still think she is a hypocrite. Finances are tough. I barely make ends meet. Thankfully food banks exist because once rent is paid, I barely have anything left over for bills and groceries. I still haven't been able to get the money for a lawyer yet. I've tried taking loans, but that didn't go over well. I've tried the borrow sub and that hasn't worked either. Now it's like we're in a state of Cold War. He refuses to talk to me. For the time being. I guess he'll come around eventually. For the kids' sake, I hope. I feel like sometimes I'm drowning in all this mess. Edit, lots of comments have come up on this post. I didn't expect as many comments. I've read as many as I can and I'll address a few points. He's gone to stay with his other brother. The second one in the family. My STBX is the oldest of 3. It's the youngest of his brothers who told me what's up. I filed my taxes back in March. He was supposed to file his a few weeks later. At the time everything was good between us and I listed him as my spouse because that's what we've been doing for the past 17 years since we got married. I have to file my next taxes as single. The school uniforms. My oldest kids are in high school. A public high school. Uniforms are mandatory across the school board. I've contacted the school and unfortunately they don't have any low-cost uniforms. They suggested I take a look at local thrift shops. They do have an emergency budget for uniforms, but only if you have recently arrived in the country. I've contacted several lawyers. I know what my rights are. I know how much it's going to cost me to take him to court. He's quit his job, so suing him for alimony or whatever is going to be tough. I don't qualify for legal aid based on previous taxes. It takes at least 90 days of him being out of the family home for me to do anything against him. He's been gone for less than 2 weeks. As for my family, I have had no contact with my parents since 2010. They do not know my younger children, nor do they care. I won't be getting into the reasons why here. His family has always been in low contact with us. His parents have never liked me, and his brother who is staying with doesn't like me either. Edit 2. For those who are saying that the timeline doesn't add up. I left with my 4 kids at the beginning of July to visit my elderly grandmother who doesn't live in the same province as us. It was supposed to give us breathing time to try and work things out. When I came back with the kids he was already gone. When I was at my grandmother's he would barely talk to me, but talk to our kids via messenger. My trip with the kids to my grandmother's is a yearly trip. I didn't know that he would go from wanting to stay and work things out to leaving. I was blindsided by that. Edit 3. I do have a PayPal account. I'm not going to start making posts on FB blasting him. I'm not setting up a GoFundMe either. I don't want him finding anything out. I don't want to get charged with trying to ruin his reputation either. I don't want him to have anything to use against me in court. Comments. Comment 1. Go file for child support at your local courthouse. You can utilize self-help to assist with filling out forms. Also, get some alimony just to be an AH. Comment 2. I would file for divorce and ask for immediate financial support and full custody of the kids as he has had no physical contact with them. Stop playing with your kids' stability and mental health. Move forward and be their parent. Soon-to-be ex can go play with his friends. Update, 7 months later. It's been a long while since I've updated everyone about what's going on. It's been almost 8 long months since he left. Everyone was right when they said he would end up with her. They got married in a civil ceremony on Christmas Day. The only time he asked me for the kids was for 2 weeks during Christmas break. He wanted them there for his wedding apparently. He barely talks to the kids now. The kids text him several times a week to let him know what's up with school and their activities. He barely answers them. When he does, he complains about how I won't let him take them overnight. He still posts pictures of his new family daily on social media. They are still taking weekend trips and all that. I hate how he's flaunting everything for our older kids to see. Our oldest is going to college in the fall, and he's worried about covering his school fees. When he tried talking to his dad about it, his dad told him that now he's almost an adult, so it's not his problem anymore. I did take him to court. I found myself a good lawyer who took on my case for free. We had our first court date last week. It went well. I got full custody of the kids. We have another court date to determine child support. He's still not working legally, so the judge is having a hard time setting an amount for child support. So far all the documents he brought to court show that he is on welfare and that his new wife pays their rent, bills and vacations. I don't buy any of that. Neither does the court. He's ordered by the court to provide documentation that he's done his taxes this year and he has to try and place himself within the job market in a reasonable amount of time, in order to provide for the children he does have. Our next court date is in April. Hopefully he's going to get his shit sorted out. As for me, I'm still working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I'll be moving next month with the kids into an apartment in a co-op building. My rent will be much lower than what I am paying now. I'm stressing out about my finances. Moving is expensive. I have to hire a company to help me move all our stuff. Plus with my son starting college soon, summer break and all that, I'm stressed out all day, every day. All I see are expenses coming up. I'm still exhausted all the time. I work more than I am at home with my kids. I hope that within the next year, things get better for us. I've started my own small business online, hopefully that picks up too. I haven't started dating either. I'm not interested in meeting anyone yet. For those of you who wrote to me saying I blew up my life and family and called me the asshole in this situation, I don't think I was the asshole. I deserve better. If I am to ever update this again, it will be on my own page. Comments. Comment 1. I'm proud of you, Op. I know it's tough now, but you will come through on the other side stronger than you were before. Comment 2. His wife will end up paying his child support most likely depending on the state. OP. We are in Canada. They aren't legally married yet. They only did a civil ceremony and didn't have a marriage license. My ex admitted this in court. Their marriage has no legal value for the moment. Knowing how he is, they won't ever get a marriage license. Comment 3. I'm sure in Canada legally married or not they may be considered common law partners, depending on how long they've been together. If that's the case, ask your lawyer if they can review their earnings as a household since she's apparently paying for everything. Oop. They have only been together since August or September if my memory serves me right. My 5-year husband abruptly and mysteriously filed for divorce. But I heard a startling exchange with his friend that told me everything. 5 years ago, I, a 30-year-old woman, married my 32-year-old husband. After almost 2 years of dating, I was completely smitten with him. I therefore said yes, without hesitation when he proposed to me. I was a surgeon at the time, and my husband was an actor who was having trouble finding a job. I paid for practically everything in the house, but I didn't mind at all. I was more than willing to pay all the bills since I wanted him to pursue his goal. Despite frequently being cast as an extra in most sequences and earning only half of what I did, he never gave up. He recently got a small part in a feature-length movie. I was ecstatic for him. For him, it was a huge event even though he just had 10 to 15 minutes of screen time. Everything appeared to be going well, and in a few weeks they were set to begin filming for his part. But 5 days ago, my husband unexpectedly served me with divorce papers, and my entire world came apart. I was caught completely off guard. I didn't think he would ask me to get a divorce. I felt the same way about him as he had about me. Everything happened so quickly. He said he no longer felt the same way about me when I asked him why. He claimed that now that he was at last receiving serious offers, he wanted to focus more of his time and efforts on his work. He said that this was only the beginning of his career and that he desired a new beginning, one that excluded me. He claimed that the burden of his former life, which reportedly included me, could not hold him down. I was heartbroken. It was unbelievable to me that he was saying this after all the sacrifices I had made and the times I had put his aspirations ahead of my own. That day, I sobbed for hours and pleaded with him to reconsider our marriage, but he refused to listen. He said that he no longer felt anything for me and that there was nothing more to be done. He thought it would be better if we split up now. I was devastated when he packed up his things and departed. I spent the following 4 days completely lost. I was so depressed that I didn't even go to work. I kept hoping that this nightmare would end. After that, my hubby called me yesterday. He had a meeting the following day, so he asked if I could leave some of his formal attire at his friend's house, where he was staying. In the hopes of meeting him face to face and perhaps persuading him to return, I gladly consented. I had no choice but to go to his friend's apartment since I was desperate. When I got there, I heard my husband and his friend conversing inside, and I saw that the door was slightly open. As I was ready to knock, his friend asked him why he had married me in the first place if he had no intention of staying. I was interested in that. I made the decision to remain silent and listen in the hopes of learning more. I had entered at the perfect, if unpleasant time, and it felt like they had already been discussing me. My husband laughed before responding to his friend's inquiry, and he continued by saying that he married me simply to utilize me to advance in his job. He acknowledged that his heart didn't love me. He had cheated on me numerous times over the years with unidentified women he met at parties or on set. I nearly gasped, but I was able to hold myself back. I wanted to hear more from my beloved hubby. He went on to say that a friend of his had introduced us, telling him that I was the daughter of a well-known dentist. My dad is among the state's top dentists, so that much was accurate. My husband was also aware that my dad frequently worked with a well-known actor. Some of his acquaintances in the business had told him about this. Everything started to make sense to me as he talked. He described how he had reached out to me in a desperate attempt to salvage his acting career. It was only a plus that I was rich and, in his opinion, easily influenced. He claimed to love me for 5 years while he waited for a chance to meet my dad's well-known customer. About 5 months ago, at my dad's 50th wedding anniversary celebration, that chance presented itself. Many of my dad's acquaintances, including his most well-liked customer who was also a close friend, were invited. My husband charmed him, spoke with him at the party, and even exchanged phone numbers with him. I didn't know at the time. Due to his hectic schedule, my dad's customer was only at the party for approximately 30 minutes, but within that brief period, my husband was able to get his number. Even though I hate him today, I must admit that when my spouse feels like it, he can be very charming. I wasn't shocked that he was able to pull it off. But I was surprised to learn that my husband had spent 5 years of our life together, causing me unspeakable heartache, all for his own self-serving ends. And to top it all off, I helped him get his current position. On the recommendation of my dad's client, the film's director signed him. I am the one who has been betrayed and is now being discarded through divorce, even though I am the one who made this huge career breakthrough. At that moment, I wanted to go in and give him a face punch, but I controlled myself. I drove home after making my way back to my car on foot. I had plenty of time to analyze my anger and devise a strategy to exact revenge on this self-centered monster because this incident occurred yesterday afternoon. I tried to relax by meditating after I got home. I was enraged and worried that if I didn't manage my emotions, I may physically harm him. I made every effort to divert my attention and devise a scheme to ruin him. Asking my dad for the actor's number, calling him, and insisting that my husband be removed from the movie was one of my first ideas. But since it was a professional issue, I wasn't sure if it would work or if my viewpoint would be taken seriously. I've known my dad's client since my undergraduate days. He knew me much better than he knew my husband, even though we weren't really close. After speaking with my parents, I finally thought it was worth a shot and gave him a call in the evening. I thought there was still a chance to make things better, so I hadn't notified anyone about the divorce yet, not even my family. I was so anxious because this was the first time I was going to admit it. His assistant finally got me through after multiple calls. Following some awkward small conversation, I spoke without pausing and said everything I needed to say. I revealed that my husband had cheated on me and secured a movie role through my dad's and my connections. I requested that he use his power to get my husband fired, stating that this would be the correct thing to do if there was any justice in the world. I'm sure he was as uneasy hearing it as I was speaking it since I said it all at once. There was a pause before he stated he would investigate. After saying thank you, he hung up. The whole experience made me feel ashamed, but it was over. At this point, my only option was to wait for a response from him or my spouse. About 10 o'clock at night, 2 hours later, my spouse began calling me in a panic. I understood then that he must have already been dismissed. I was shocked at how fast it had transpired. I texted the man who made it happen to say thank you. He hadn't had much trouble taking care of it because there hadn't been a legal contract, just a verbal understanding. He responded to my text with good wishes for the future, which I found to be quite considerate and gave me hope again. Without a care in the world, I turned off my phone, disregarded all of my husband's calls and texts, and went to bed. I'm not lying when I say that I had the best sleep of my life. As I was getting ready to go for work this morning, I heard my husband yelling for me from outside my door and pleading with me to open it. I told him to go because I had to leave for work and didn't intend to let him in. He was unwilling to give up though, and insisted that I have one final conversation with him before removing him from my life. I eventually grew tired of his shenanigans and let him in, telling him that I would not waste my time again. He sobbed as he dropped to his knees and admitted that he had erred. He pleaded for another opportunity, saying that I was the only woman he had ever loved. However, I no longer felt sorry for him because I knew how talented an actor he was. After letting him cry for a few minutes, I inquired about the success of his acting role in the movie. I deliberately used a mocking tone because, let's face it, that's precisely what I was doing. He appeared shocked for a second before realizing what had happened. He went crazy when he realized that I was the reason he had lost the chance of a lifetime. He began yelling in my face, saying that I had ruined his life and that I would be held accountable. I also didn't hold back. I shouted back at him, telling him that he deserved this, if not worse, because he had destroyed 5 years of my life. After what seemed like 5 minutes of us yelling at one another, he finally broke down. He was aware that no amount of yelling would restore what he had lost, neither the role nor the happy life he had been having with me. He was solely responsible for his own actions. Even though he was crying, he made sure to tell me that he would take everything from the divorce and leave me on the streets, which made me feel almost terrible for him. Those were fairly audacious remarks, and any pity I might have had for him was instantly gone. I told him to leave my place as respectfully as possible. He complied, leaving while still sobbing and mumbling obscenities. That day, I made the decision to skip work once more. I wasn't feeling well, and the events had been terrible and weighty. First update. At last, I disclosed the divorce to my family and acquaintances. They were just as caught off guard as I had been when my spouse initially expressed his desires to me. But they were all appalled when I told them what I had heard at his friend's place. They even said that what he had done to me was far worse than my vengeance. When my dad learned that my husband had taken advantage of both him and me to further his objectives, he became quite angry. He wanted to go to my husband's house and use his fists to make him understand, but I was able to calm him down. I'm happy that most people concur that my actions were appropriate. My husband's treatment of me was so harsh. It permanently damaged my trust in marriage and men. He deserved to be punished for his efforts, in my opinion. I had spent many years and a significant amount of money on our marriage, just as he had spent years on his work. I don't think it matters that I destroyed his career on my own if he could destroy our marriage on his own. He keeps contacting me online, pleading with me to retract my remarks and assist him in regaining the part, as if he had been cheated out of a chance. Despite my efforts to block his accounts, he continues to create new ones out of desperation. I'm now thinking of completely stepping away from social networking. After everything he's done, I don't see why he feels entitled to get in touch with me. I hope he eventually understands that he's done and that there's no turning back. It appears that his threats to destroy me throughout the divorce were mostly verbal. We both understand that he cannot harm me in any way. Second update. A few days ago, I erased my social media account and blocked my husband. But it appears that I also need to update my phone number. I've had between 70 and 80 spam calls from various numbers since last night. I'm going wild over it. My phone is constantly buzzing every few minutes, and it's always from a different number. I know it's him, but I'm not sure how he's doing it. I even gave him a call to tell him to stop and to be aware that his actions would have an impact on the settlement. I was obviously bluffing. No deal is possible. I was attempting to use it as leverage to get him to quit pestering me, even though I owe him nothing. He was adamant about denying any role in the calls though. His voice made it clear to me that he was lying, which only made me feel more irritated. As I was about to cry at the end of the conversation, he hinted that if he were to miraculously regain his role, the calls may cease. The final straw was that. I yelled as many colorful profanities as I could at him before shutting off my phone. I have been using my laptop to surf the internet and have yet to switch it back on. I only intend to switch my phone back on after I have a new number. Since he will no longer be able to reach me, hopefully it will stop him from making me insane. Everyone is aware that I will not challenge the divorce. In a few days, we are expected to appear in court. I don't understand why he is acting inappropriately when he is well aware that we will soon be in court together. He is also aware that if I so desired, I could make his situation far worse. I'm lucky he doesn't. I want to let this whole thing go without a struggle since I've already done what I have to do. I can't go on if I hold on to this anger and allow him to bother me. I'm eager to close this phase of my life. I don't care what happens to him. I'm no longer concerned about his future success or failure. Third update, my husband and I are scheduled to appear in court the day after tomorrow. Naturally, he couldn't allow that to occur without acting in a crazy or psychotic manner. I was certain that he could no longer contact me because I had canceled my social media accounts and changed my phone number. I believed that he would be forced to give up since I had finally defeated him. But I didn't realize how insane he really is. My hubby unexpectedly showed up and sat down next to me in the passenger seat last night as I was getting ready to drive home. Before I could even react, he closed the doors. I quickly retrieved my pepper spray from my purse after realizing what was going on. He grabbed the purse and threw it into the back car, but I was too late. I was so scared that I was willing to do anything he asked me to get out of this predicament safely. It became even more frightening when he spoke to me in a calm manner. When he stated that he didn't want much, I called my dad's actor client, retracted my statement, and made sure he was given his role back. I pretended to agree, telling him that in order to make the call, I required my phone out of my handbag. Now, my hubby is definitely stupid, but I'm not. When he gave me the handbag, I immediately reached for my pepper spray and sprayed him with half of it at once. His condition was much worse than mine, which was watering and stinging horribly. He was having trouble breathing, spluttering and coughing. I pulled him out of the car, unlocked the doors, and drove off, leaving him coughing on the ground. Before I had to stop, I had only made it out of the parking lot and a few yards from my place of employment. I realized I couldn't drive home in my current state of vision impairment, so I got out of my car. Fortunately, a taxi arrived, and the driver appeared to be a friendly individual. He volunteered to drive me to the closest police station after seeing something was strange. Without hesitation, I agreed. The 2 hours that followed were a haze. After what had transpired in the parking lot, I was still in shock. Although I had always known my spouse was insane, this was much more than I had anticipated. It was difficult to accept that after 5 years of a happy marriage, this man was suddenly causing me to suffer through this nightmare. Fortunately, he was taken into custody. Because of his condition, he had been unable to leave the parking lot. His face was still red and a little puffy when they took him to the station. The fact that he was in pain made me happy. I left the station after pressing charges, but I went to my parents' house instead of home. I haven't left their house since I got there because I no longer felt safe being by myself. The support from my parents has been tremendous. One little comfort during this journey has been that they have been treating me like their little girl once more. This time, I'm not stopping my dad from fulfilling his commitment to make sure my husband receives a suitable punishment. It is imperative that certain guys realize that they cannot bully women and get away with it. Fourth update. Hello to everybody. A few weeks have passed since my last update, and I'm pleased to report some positive developments. For what he did to me, my husband received a 3-month prison sentence and a hefty fine. I believe this result is fair, even though I wish the punishment had been lengthier. Given the circumstances, we were able to expedite the divorce process, and it will be completed much sooner than typical. I'm so relieved that he doesn't have any compensation rights. In order to make sure he can't find me again, I've also sold the house and my car. In addition to being superior, the new hospital where I work is also nearer to my parents' house. For me, commuting is far more convenient. Even though my spouse can no longer reach me, at least not for the foreseeable future, they won't let me return to living alone, so for the time being I'm still living with my parents. To my surprise, I don't mind remaining with them. As I'm still getting over the shock of everything that's transpired, their support has been consoling. In order to better digest my feelings, I've also begun going to therapy. I'm aware that recovery will take time and that things won't return to normal right away. I try my hardest to move on, but sometimes I can't help but think back on the years we had together. Some of the moments felt so real that it's difficult to realize it was all falsehoods. Every time I find myself thinking about him, I make myself recall the events that followed, particularly the parking lot incident. That brings me back to the here and now. I'm taking things one day at a time, even though I know these wounds won't heal right away. I'm hoping that I'll be all right shortly. And to be honest, I can't wait for that day. I grew up in indifference, loved by my grandparents. Despite neglect and being used, I forgave my parents in their old age. I was a surprise and an afterthought for parents in their 40s with a daughter who was 10 years old. My mother used to say, "We didn't plan for you," as if she were monitoring the weather. The message was plain, but she would not say the rest. I was only here because my grandparents convinced my reluctant parents to have another child. My sister Jessica was already engrossed in her adolescent world when I got there. She acted indifferently, not viciously, like if I didn't exist. I would play with my dolls in the corner of our shared living room while she was on the phone, splayed out on the sofa, discussing college applications and boys. Mom would urge Jessica not to forget anything as she carefully placed her SAT preparation materials in her backpack. In the meantime, I would wait at the kitchen table in the hopes that someone would assist me with my schoolwork, but assistance was infrequent. Rather, a pattern set by my parents influenced my life. Every morning, they dropped me off at my grandparents' place. My grandparents' house became my real home when my father would jingle his keys and tell my grandfather, "You wanted her, she's all yours." They made sure I was fed and taken care of, picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, and took me to the park. My parents would show up late at night, looking exhausted and a little annoyed at the trouble of having to come get me. "Ashley, you're the best thing that ever happened to us," my grandma would remark as she gave me a final hug each night. I could almost forget that I wasn't loved at home in her warm embrace. This pattern persisted year after year and day after day. In my parents' home, I learned to live as an afterthought while my sister got ready for her promising future. My grandparents' devotion, however, never wavered. "One day you'll understand that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." My grandfather would wink at me as we worked on arithmetic problems, and for a minute, the weight of being unloved was lifted off my little shoulders. I hoped that would change when Jessica left for college. As the daughter who stayed, perhaps my parents would finally see me. I was completely mistaken. My mother's voice rang out to me as soon as I entered the house after school. "Ashley, the house has to be cleaned. Begin with the restrooms." I took over all of the tasks that Jessica had previously handled, in addition to a number of other duties. I got to know the washing machine's settings by heart and it became my daily companion. The housework seemed to go on forever. Every time I hesitated, my father would remark, "You have to help, you live here? Your sister always took the brunt of it." The changes at home weren't even gradual by the time I was 14. After work, they expected dinner to be ready, so I made spaghetti that night, but my mother abruptly stopped preparing it, saying, "You're old enough now." It was good, albeit a little overcooked. My parents ate in silence until my father stated, "Tomorrow, try something with chicken," without raising his head, in a tone that made it obvious this was not a recommendation. My escape was to dream about college. Every night after finishing my homework and chores, I would go to my room and go to university websites, visualizing myself strolling around campus, unencumbered by the never-ending responsibilities at home. One Sunday afternoon when I was 16, Jessica came home with news that changed everything. A tall, well-dressed man followed her as she entered. She exclaimed, "Mom, Dad. This is Michael. We're engaged," as if someone had declared a lottery victory. My parents leaped from their seats, and my mother wept with delight. My mother, embracing Jessica, exclaimed, "We'll pay for everything. It has to be flawless for our first daughter's wedding." My father immediately began phoning family members. The house was bustling with wedding preparations for months. Discussions centered on guest lists, venues, and flowers. Designer clothing and upscale shops were commonplace. Despite being present at the wedding, my grandparents were uncomfortable with the extravagant decor. While my grandfather nodded solemnly at the champagne fountain, my grandma scowled at the ice sculpture, which was probably worth more than a semester's worth of college tuition. They didn't share their thoughts. 3 college admission letters surrounded me as I sat at the dinner table 2 years later. Every one of my top options had accepted me. It had paid off after years of playing Cinderella and getting straight A's. I told my folks the news with a fluttering heart. "That's nice," my mother said, not even raising her head from her dinner. "But we spent all our savings on your sister's wedding. Even took out a loan." "There's nothing left for college," I muttered. "But you still paid for Jessica's college." "That was different," said my mom. "We considered her to have a promise." At the table, the silence grew intolerable. My parents were still eating, unconcerned that they had just dashed my hopes, and my admission letters felt heavier in my hands. In between nibbles, my father added, "You should find a job. Save some money. That's what responsible adults do. Take out a student loan." I walked away from the table without requesting an excuse, tears running down my cheeks. I contacted my grandmother, who lived nearby, trembling. I was at their door in a matter of minutes, sobbing in her consoling arms as I told them everything. My granddad listened carefully, his face hardening. But I couldn't quite pinpoint something in his eyes. When I was done, my grandfather's voice was forceful. "Ashley, we've been expecting this." I said. "What do you mean?" My grandma softly said. "We've seen how they treated you over the years. How they spent on Jessica's education, her wedding. We knew they might do this to you. After disappearing into his study, my grandfather came back carrying a folder. He said, "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born." And he opened it to show bank documents. "You are covered. You can choose any of those 3 colleges." That night, I returned home and began packing only the things I would need, not everything. My parents barely looked away from the television when I told them I was moving in with my grandparents. "Whatever you think is best," my mother murmured, her eyes never leaving the screen, and I sensed relief in her voice. The weeks that followed were spent getting ready for college. Motivated by my parents' inadequate money management, I decided to get a degree in financial analysis in order to learn how to do things correctly. My grandparents assisted me with every aspect, from purchasing supplies to completing paperwork. It was like entering a whole new world when courses began that fall. Even though the schoolwork was difficult, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Every lecture felt like a stride toward a brighter future and a step away from my past. I was so excited that my lecturers noticed me. Before long, I was staying after class to talk about difficult financial ideas. Someone other than my grandparents saw potential in me for the first time in my life. My grandmother contacted me during my sophomore year of college to share some shocking Jessica news. During one of our weekly calls, she mentioned that her sister was experiencing difficulties. Michael is unable to maintain a job, and her marketing career isn't progressing as expected. They are constantly requesting money from your parents. The fact that my parents were providing them with money didn't surprise me. With a sigh, my grandmother said, "Your mother spent all of her retirement money last month to pay their rent. They just can't refuse her." The situation deteriorated a year later. Despite my parents' financial assistance, Jessica and Michael were unable to pay their rent and returned to my former bedroom, which I had maintained immaculate for years. I didn't miss the irony. In the meantime, I was doing well. I was given internships at prominent financial firms by my teachers, where I was able to hone my innate ability to solve challenging financial challenges. My confidence increased with each project. "You have a natural sense for this," my boss said to me during a Morgan Stanley performance assessment. "We hope to see you again in the summer." I ignored my grandparents' sporadic calls since I was too preoccupied with my education and future plans. But I knew right away that something wasn't right when I went to see them in my senior year. My grandmother's bright smile was forced, and my grandfather, who is normally happy, sat quietly in his recliner. Unspoken comments weighed heavily on the house. I inquired over dinner. "What's wrong?" I urged. "Don't tell me it's nothing," as they pushed food around their plates. "I am too familiar with you both." They looked at each other in a way that I had seen a lot before, which indicated that they were attempting to shield me from terrible news. My grandfather finally said something. "Last week, your parents visited us," he remarked in a tired tone. "They requested their share of the inheritance." "What are you saying?" I dropped my fork and asked. My grandmother clarified that they were having issues with the banks. Numerous credit card debts and loans. They claimed that in order to stay out of bankruptcy, they needed $200,000. I was so angry that I couldn't control myself. "You also handed it to them?" My grandfather gave a nod. "Ashley, we had to. They are still our daughter and son-in-law despite everything," he remarked. "It was most of our savings," my grandmother said quietly. "The majority of your funds?" I let out a yell. "After their actions? How did they allow Jessica's careless actions to continue? After the way they handled me?" Across the table, my grandmother reached out and took my hands. "We understand your rage, sweetie, but what's done is done. We'll be all right." I wasn't feeling it though. I was furious. After treating me like a servant and never having the funds for my education, my parents now had the gall to demand money from the only people who had ever shown me genuine concern. After I graduated, my efforts were rewarded. I was employed by one of the best financial firms in the area thanks to my excellent internship experiences and the excellent recommendations from my teachers. The initial pay was more than I could have ever imagined. I had a tremendous sense of independence when I discovered a tiny, tidy, and safe one-bedroom apartment. Knowing I had no one else to cook for, I awoke each morning with gratitude and threw myself into every new task. I received incentives and promotions much beyond what my younger self could have ever dreamed of. I saved enough for a down payment on a home while my career took off. I couldn't help but think about my parents and Jessica on the day I signed the mortgage papers because they had never been able to manage their finances well enough to own a home. We hadn't communicated in years, so it's unlikely that they would learn about my accomplishment. Then came the call that made all the difference. A severe heart attack had struck my grandfather. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. My grandma seemed to lose her spark after spending more than 50 years by his side. She followed him less than 2 months later. I was in the parlor organizing my grandmother's funeral when I heard a voice I recognized. "Ashley, would you like assistance making the arrangements?" I turned and saw my mom. She was older and more worn out than I had recalled. Something in her eyes made me think twice before telling her to go. "Yes," I said in a quiet voice. "It would be pleasant." Over the course of the following few days, my parents started to open up as we planned the service. They acknowledged that they were having financial difficulties. One time, while we were selecting flowers, my father remarked, "Retirement hasn't been kind to us." "And with the twins of Jessica." "Twins?" Startled, I broke off. "Yes, 4-year-olds, my mom answered with a small smile. "What lovely boys. However, we assist where we can because Jessica and Michael are still unable to handle alone." I kept my face expressionless as I nodded. There are some things that never change. We gathered in a wood-paneled office for the reading of the will 1 week after my grandmother was laid to rest. The tension in the room was palpable as I sat across from my parents, Jessica, and Michael. Mr. Patterson, the notary, put on his spectacles and started reading. He remarked, "We leave our home at 1542 Maple Street and the amount of $150,000 to our dear granddaughter Ashley." There was a deafening silence that ensued. Jessica's jaw dropped wide in disbelief, and my mother's knuckles turned white as she seized my father's arm. Mr. Patterson read on after clearing his throat. He turned to face my mother and added, "And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter Margaret. Remember, Margaret, that we provided you with $200,000 just when you needed it most. We trust that you will respect our ultimate choice, just as we respected your needs." My mother's face turned pale after flushing hot. As my father gazed at the floor, Jessica and Michael exchanged anxious looks. After the will reading, my parents came up to me in the parking lot, their once confident manner from the funeral planning now tinged with desperation. My mother said in a shaky voice, "Ashley, honey, you must understand. We always assumed the house would be ours. We were relying on it. We're having trouble." My dad combed through his thinning hair. "The house would be very helpful for Jessica's family's expenses and the mortgage." The years of neglect, the incessant reminders that I wasn't wanted, and their refusal to pay for my education came back to me as I looked at them. "No," I firmly answered. "I own the house. This is what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." Even as Jessica interjected that her twins needed a yard to play in, they followed me begging to my car. Remaining strong, I got into my car and drove off. My mother called me a week later to invite me to supper. She spoke in an extremely modest tone. I agreed against my better judgment. The house looked worse than I remembered when I got there. The gutter sagged, the paint was peeling, and the previously immaculate grass was overgrown and spotty. The house was neat yet chaotic inside. Tommy and Jake, Jessica's twins, sprinted around the living room, their curly hair and sparkling eyes endearing yet vivacious. My mother pulled me into an awkward embrace and murmured, "Ashley, your favorite pot roast was prepared by us." "It's not my favorite," I responded without thinking. "Jess loves that the most." My father clearing his throat was the only sound to break the uneasy stillness that ensued. "Well, how about sharing your favorite food with us?" he inquired. They looked genuinely interested, which surprised us. "We'd love to know." They inquired about my job, my house, and my hobbies over supper. They paid close attention as I discussed my financial profession, even though a lot of it was beyond their comprehension. Another dinner followed, and then another. Before long, I was bringing gifts for the twins, enjoying holidays with them, and even helping Jessica with her schoolwork. I sometimes offered to help when they indicated that the house needed repairs. I even painted the front of the house, paid for a new roof, and restored the heating system. My parents wept with appreciation each time I sent them a check. My mother would embrace me and say, "You're too kind to us, we don't deserve this." I often thought, "You're right," but I never actually said it out loud. A tiny part of me remained hopeful that people might change in spite of all the years of abuse and neglect. As the years went by, my career kept growing. New chances arose with each promotion, and my investments increased dramatically. At the same time, I felt that my relationship with my parents was getting better. They were both already over 70, and I began to wish I could do something meaningful for them. I said, "I've been thinking," as I watched my father strain to get out of his chair at one of our Sunday dinners. "I'd like to purchase a new home for you. Something comfy for your retirement years that is single-story, has a lovely garden, and is easier to maintain. You are no longer a good fit for this house." I was astounded by their reactions, which were sincere joyous tears. We spent weeks looking for a house together before locating the ideal one. A stunning ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood with spacious entrances and no stairs. After I closed my checkbook, my parents continued to remark about how thrilled they were. My father responded, "We need to plan a suitable housewarming party." A knot of bitterness tightened in my stomach as I observed the celebration from the shadows across the street. Inside, my parents' friends mixed with relatives I hardly knew. With their faces flushed with excitement, Jessica, her husband, and their twin boys were the center of attention. I was the afterthought daughter they had never trusted, and I was the reason for it all. Radiant, my parents walked through the crowd like kings and queens, having at last achieved their long-held goal of owning a lovely home that would serve as a symbol of security and comfort. I gave a sour laugh. I hadn't even received an invitation to the party from them. I felt like an outsider to their enjoyment, a foreigner. The realization was a sharp pain that echoed the years of disregard and apathy I had experienced. I recalled the hours I had spent studying while Jessica relished the results of their constant support, the sacrifices I had made, and the lonely nights I had spent daydreaming about leaving our home's oppressive atmosphere. And now here they were, enjoying my triumph without realizing the pain they had brought about. I stayed put because of a deep-seated dread of rejection that had been ingrained in me since I was a young child. In front of their visitors, I wanted to storm across the street, confront them, and reveal their hypocrisy. Instead, I felt a wave of blazing, searing rage. With the sounds of their jubilation fading behind me, I turned and left. Long after the music ended, the unfairness of it all left a foul taste in my throat. That evening, I decided something. I would no longer be the unseen hand that kept their lives afloat, their silent benefactor. I would separate myself, retreat, and shield myself from more harm. My parents' reactions when I informed them that I was severing my relationship were predictable. Shock, incredulity, and charges of ingratitude. My voice still lacked the warmth I had compelled myself to display throughout the years. I experienced a strange mixture of relief at finally being freed from their emotional control, sadness for the family I had never really known, and longing for the love I had always craved when I hung up the phone. It was an opportunity to start again and live my life as I saw fit, free from the burdens of the past. Years went by. I created a meaningful and purposeful existence. My career took off, and I found solace in the quiet fulfillment that came from my work. I purchased a modest, cozy home that was really mine. I even found a loving man who accepted me for who I am. The news then struck me like a blow to the body. All the old scars, all the years of bitterness and contempt, returned with a vengeance. I struggled with my emotions, torn between the desire for revenge and a persistent sense of duty. The days became restless nights. The fallen leaves crunched underfoot as I strolled down the well-known streets in my area. Every step was like traveling through my memory maze. I reflected on my grandparents, whose steadfast love shone brightly in the shadows of my early years. Their compassionate and wise faces seemed to be whispering in the breeze, pleading with me to forgive. I finally made the decision to break out from the pattern of abandonment and neglect that had molded my existence. Instead of being angry, I decided to face my parents with the quiet respect they had never shown me. My mother, who had formerly been strong and authoritative, was now slender and bewildered, her eyes clouded with terror. My father clung to her hand with a desperation that reflected my own boyhood desire, his once strong voice now reduced to a ragged whisper. I went to see them in the nursing home, a cold, impersonal structure that smelled of decay and disinfectant. I had a peculiar sense of calm when I saw them in a way, devoid of their strength and pretense. A deep melancholy took the place of the rage that had festered for so long. They were the ones who had given birth to me. They were still my parents in spite of their faults and failures. It wasn't simple. My hard-won tranquility was challenged by occasional bursts of hatred and hostility. But I remained with them day after day. I met their demands and gave them the attention and consolation they had long denied me. My mother looked at me with a clarity I hadn't seen in years one evening as I sat next to her bed and held her weak hand. With a shaky voice, she replied, "Ashley, I'm so sorry we neglected you." My eyes filled with tears. It was the recognition of the hurt they had inflicted, the apology I had longed for all my life. I became aware that I had at last escaped at that instant. I was no longer bound by the past. I could move on with my life, forgive and heal. We discovered a shaky calm in those final days, a provisional comprehension that went beyond years of pain and disappointment. Although it wasn't the perfect family I had envisioned, it was sufficient. In a tale that had started with neglect and finished with forgiveness, it was closure, the last chapter. Am I the asshole for excluding my cheating husband from the delivery room and naming our baby without him? This is a throwaway account because I'm so annoyed and need to vent. This will be a lot, so I'm sorry in advance. I, 28F, had been together with my husband, 27M, for nearly 10 years. We got married at 21, had our first son a year after, followed by our daughter 3 years later. I built my whole life around my family. We got good jobs. He worked full-time, I worked from home, we had a good home in a great neighborhood, and we put our children in good schools. We also had a successful business on the side. I thought we did everything right. My best friend, since we were in middle school, lived close. We had our daughters around the same time, and we'd have playdates all the time. We leaned on each other a lot. I gave her all the support when she was going through issues with her daughter's deadbeat father and got her in contact with a good lawyer. I leaned on her when I was recovering from my traumatic second birth and the depression that followed. We leaned on each other for everything. 10 months ago, I found out I was pregnant for the third time. I was really uneasy about this because of my traumatic experience the second time. Also, my husband and I both agreed we were done after our 2 children. I considered abortion, but my husband insisted we keep it. I was still uneasy about the pregnancy and borderline miserable for the next 6 months. I was diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum and was throwing up 20 times a day for 6 months straight. I lost a ton of weight, had to stop working, and was sent to the hospital frequently due to severe dehydration. My husband stood by me and showered me with attention, for which I was so grateful. He cut down his hours at work to look after me, the house, and the kids. My best friend would come to our home frequently to check on me and also help with the house. When I hit 6 months, the hyperemesis gravidarum decreased a lot, and I was almost back to myself. One night after having a movie night with my family, my husband and I were getting ready to sleep. He fell asleep right away while I quickly checked on the kids before getting into bed. His phone was vibrating like crazy, so out of genuine curiosity, I unlocked his phone. We used to do this a lot when we were younger, so I didn't think too much of it. I was already sitting in bed. I saw messages from my friend. They were frantic spam messages. One of them said, "Please come over, I need you." Another said, "I know I shouldn't be messaging here, but I miss you. And come over when she's asleep." I think I was there in a daze for nearly 5 minutes. I cried a lot quietly, and the fatigue kind of left me. I scoured his phone looking for more. I saw emails and DMs from them both, even using apps like Kik to message, and the pictures. But the worst part was finding out my husband left me one time in the hospital with my mother while he went back home, where my kids were being babysat by my friend, and got intimate in our bedroom, with our kids in the house. I kicked him out the following morning after confronting him and filed for separation sometime after. For the next 2 months, he had been begging for forgiveness, then complaining and insulting me that I'm not letting him see his kids, or that I'm stopping him from going with me to doctor appointments, which I had been. We had planned months earlier about who was going to be in the labor room. It was going to be my mother and husband. He called me when I was 35 weeks, questioning the labor situation. At this point, he had moved in with my ex-friend's house shortly before this call. I said no, and he got very angry. Lots of my in-laws and family members told me to put our differences aside for our baby. I still said no. I gave birth to my son with my mother and sister present and didn't feel any regret about my choice. After my second traumatic birth, I just wanted to make sure this one was as stable as possible, which it was. We were going to name our child after his father who passed away. I went along with it to make him happy but changed my mind and picked a name I had always loved since childhood. This aggravated him even more. AITA? Because I'm being guilt-tripped by many people right now. All I want is for everyone to leave me alone and for me to just be with my kids. Edit. Just wanted to add that I do let him see the kids. That would be crazy if I didn't. My children love their dad. I just have certain boundaries now that we aren't together, and he doesn't respect them. He gets angry and says things that are categorically not true. He got to meet our newborn son hours after I gave birth. Update. So, I'm back after nearly a whole year. I completely forgot about this post because I've been so wrapped up in other things. For anyone who doesn't want to read the whole post, here's a summary. My husband had been cheating on me with my best friend while I was pregnant. I was close to giving birth and decided not to have my then husband in the labor room with me. I also chose a name for our baby that he didn't agree with. Like I said, it's basically been a whole year. My baby turned 1 today, and after celebrating his birthday and Christmas with my kids, it finally hit me that this is my new reality. First of all, my ex-husband and I finally went through with the divorce proceedings. I had been holding it off during my pregnancy and early postpartum period to avoid added stress and to carefully plan for my children and myself. I was awarded primary physical custody of our children. Their dad visits once a week, and the 2 older kids, 7 and 4, spend every other weekend with him. My youngest will start doing the same in a couple of months, which makes me nervous. He's especially clingy with me, all my kids are, but my youngest has really only known me as the most present parent. One of the main stipulations in our custody agreement is that my ex's affair partner is prohibited from seeing the kids. My poor kids have been confused enough by their parents' sudden split, and I didn't want them even more confused by seeing their aunt, who is supposed to be mommy's best friend, with their dad. It was deemed emotionally detrimental in court. As for the baby name, he's been so bitter about it, I think he's still mad about it. His side has been trying to convince me to change the name to something we'd both like, especially after the divorce was finalized. But it's been a year now, and the baby quite literally answers by the name I gave him, so I'm not going to be changing it. He was also unhappy with the child support payments, among other payments, and asked for some revisions. One main thing he asked to change was the cost of our kids' school tuition. He pays for their tuition, which he felt was too much and too harsh. But the court stuck with the original payments. As for my ex-husband and ex-best friend, they continued dating. I found out that they had started seeing each other a month into my third pregnancy. They had actually slept together during my second pregnancy but didn't pursue a relationship then because, as they put it, they weren't ready to ruin things and didn't want to hurt anybody. My ex's side have been very supportive of their relationship, even inviting her to holiday gatherings like Thanksgivings or family holidays. Because of this, my kids don't go very often to these events. I don't know, after this whole fiasco I'm coming to the realization that perhaps my ex's side never really liked me all that much. But that's okay. I eventually spoke with my ex-best friend to ask why they did it. She claimed that they were just friends but grew close while she was dealing with issues involving her deadbeat ex-boyfriend. Both of them insisted that my ex-husband just wanted to protect her, which supposedly turned into love. Hearing this hurt me a lot, but at the same time, I felt relieved to know the truth. When I sat with this information for a while, it stopped hurting. It made me realize that I didn't still love my ex-husband and could finally let go of him and their betrayal. They broke up a week ago. Apparently, it's just a break, though who knows? Although my kids go to their dad's house every other weekend, it has helped a lot with making time for myself. Obviously, I'm figuring out who I am without being a wife or mom all the time. In many ways, I find what happened to be a true blessing, which is why I'm no longer angry. As for me, I've been seeing someone. It hasn't been very long, but we get along great. Initially, my ex-husband made the whole situation difficult. He didn't want me to have any man, specifically, around the kids. Edit. I don't know how to update posts, so my apologies if it's wrong. When my husband had lupus, my parents abandoned me during pregnancy. They returned years later wanting to be grandparents but never apologized. When my husband was diagnosed with lupus, my parents left me during my pregnancy, saying that he and my unborn child weren't part of their family. They arrived 3 years later and expressed a desire to become grandparents. I severed my relationship with my parents 3 years ago after it became evident to them that my sister was more significant to them than my husband, me, or even their grandson. For background, after nearly a year of symptoms, my spouse was diagnosed with lupus during my second trimester. After multiple testing and hospital stays, we received this diagnosis, and it was a very trying period for us. The news that we were having a baby made us even more anxious. I anticipated my family to help us through this, of course. When I told my parents, they promised to do everything in their power to support me during my pregnancy and after the baby was delivered. Despite our tense prior history, I believed we were becoming closer since my sister moved away after her marriage 7 years ago, thus their pledge meant a lot to me. During her time here, my parents always emphasized her as the golden child. After she moved away and got preoccupied with her life, I believed I had a chance to connect with my parents at last. I was mistaken. I was only viewed by them as a stand-in for their favorite daughter. When my sister came home 2 months after my baby was born and announced her divorce due to her husband's infidelity, this became evident. My parents spent all of their time with her right away, forgetting about me and my relatives. I was heartbroken. Knowing that my husband and I were still adjusting to his diagnosis and frequent doctor's appointments, they had pledged to help with the baby. Because of his illness, which left him exhausted most of the time, I wasn't always able to rely on my spouse at home. Even yet, I was angry with my parents and never blamed him. My parents once became irate and told me that my sister was more significant to them than I was, particularly if I were to compare her to my own family. They claimed that although my sister was their family, my husband and son were neither. I quickly ended the call, blocked them, and never spoke to them again because that sentence was so extremely upsetting. Despite the passage of 3 years, I still can't get it out of my head. I've kept them out of my life ever then, and I want to continue doing so. Fortunately, My in-laws stepped up and provided us with excellent care. They would visit every other day to help with the baby and everything else because they knew my husband was struggling, even during my pregnancy. Even though we got along quite fine without my parents' assistance, it still hurt a lot that they didn't even think of my husband and son, especially their grandson, as members of their family. We have now moved on after 3 years. We can afford to hire a full-time nurse, and last year my husband's web development company took off. We now operate our business from home together after I resigned my job to work with him. It is a practical arrangement. My parents unexpectedly arrived with a slew of gifts a few days after we celebrated our son's 3rd birthday. Since we hadn't spoken for 3 years, they hadn't tried to get in touch, so I was shocked to see them. They didn't even recognize our earlier talk when they got there. They pretended that they had come to meet their grandson and wanted the opportunity to become grandparents, rather than offering an apology. I laughed, closed the door, and refused to interact since their actions were so absurd. After what they said the last time we spoke, I was not going to allow them to meet my son. Their statement that my husband and son were neither their family nor their responsibilities is still fresh in my mind. I wanted them to follow it now. They were agitated and would not go, making noise and pleading with me to open the door in order to clear the air, but I had no interest in doing so. Until they eventually left, I acted as though I couldn't hear them. Despite hearing the entire exchange, my husband and in-laws remained silent until I had composed myself. They talked to me about 30 minutes later and advised me to talk to my parents again, even though I didn't want to give them an opportunity to meet my son just yet. My spouse and his parents feel that I should at least listen to them and consider it calmly. They contend that I would regret not giving my parents an opportunity to explain themselves because they still made the effort to show their, even though it has been 3 years. At least I'll feel good about giving them an opportunity, even if it doesn't work out, and they were the ones who blew it. I followed my instructions. I truly appreciate that my spouse and in-laws were not forcing their opinions on me. I know that their counsel was given out of care. But I simply don't want to speak with my folks. I don't think I need that type of drama in my life right now, and I don't feel ready. I've always had a tense relationship with my parents, and following that most recent argument, I made the decision that I wouldn't talk to them unless they truly apologized. That still hasn't occurred. They didn't offer an apology when they recently appeared. Even if they later apologize, I'll need some time to determine whether their sincerity or desire to maintain a relationship with their grandchild is the reason. I believe I've earned the right to forgive them, so I won't be doing it right away. My sister has always been their top priority, and they have never treated me well. However, I acknowledge that I might regret not providing my parents an opportunity to clarify their position and make amends, as my husband and in-laws have pointed out. I'm unsure of what to do and am bewildered. After 3 years of no communication, am I mistaken for not wishing to speak with my parents? Update: I've given it some thought and read over all of the comments. I really appreciate your advice. I've come to the conclusion that I'm not yet ready to speak with my parents. Their actions have still caused me much emotional pain. They still haven't apologized, and I had decided not to talk to them until they did. They had the opportunity to apologize when they arrived the other day, but they chose not to. After I shut them out, they attempted to speak to me through the door, claiming that we could resolve the matter. They never said the one thing they were expected to say. They were sorry. It's okay. I've gone 3 years without speaking to anyone, and I can do the same for the next 3. My husband and his family and I have spoken about this, and we don't have any animosity. This choice isn't causing us any conflict. They knew how distressed I was when my parents contacted me, so they were only offering me advice out of concern. They don't argue or put any pressure on you. Since several comments seem to cast doubt on their motives, I just wanted to make that clear. The support from my husband and in-laws is tremendous. Even if it were for the benefit of my family, they would never make me do something I wasn't prepared for. My parents were quite kind when I told them how I felt and that I wasn't ready to talk to them. They assured me that they would respect my choice and not put any pressure on me, even if I didn't feel ready at any time thereafter. They made it clear that they would totally support me in making the greatest decision for myself since they trusted me to do so. Although I appreciate their understanding, I simply don't feel prepared to speak with my parents at this time. Right now, I don't want that kind of turmoil in my life. My parents haven't tried to get in touch with me since their visit, which was nearly a week ago. I'm not sure why they made the abrupt attempt to get in touch after 3 years, but I have a feeling they might try again. It's okay if they don't. If they do, they must first apologize before I will engage them. Second update: my sister contacted me earlier this week. She messaged me on Instagram to ask if we could have lunch because she was in the area and I hadn't blocked her. Despite our lack of animosity, my sister and I have never been particularly close. Although we had disagreements when we were teenagers, things have been peaceful ever since. I was hesitant to meet her at first, but I accepted her message because it seemed genuine. We haven't communicated much during the last 3 years, usually simply sharing birthday and holiday greetings. In spite of my suspicion that she would eventually bring up our parents, meeting her wasn't as awkward as I had anticipated. We struck up a conversation. She stated that she has been residing close by ever since her divorce was finalized 2 years ago. She acknowledged that she had been too busy to schedule a meeting with me earlier. We both knew that was untrue, we had just not given each other priority. However, I accepted her excuse because it would have been embarrassing to admit that straight. She told me that after spending her first year back with our parents, she moved to a suburban home and now resides with her partner. She also disclosed that, although she hasn't made the announcement yet, she recently got engaged. I really congratulated her and expressed my happiness for her. I was happy to see her moving on with her life because I knew how deeply her ex-husband's infidelity had wounded her. She eventually brought up our parents after meeting up. Things took an unexpected turn at this point. Since she has always gotten along with them and they have always put her first, I expected her to stand up for them. Although it wasn't her fault, she never seemed to bother. Instead, she informed me that she is currently at odds with them. She acknowledged that she wanted to talk to me about a few things and to express her regret for the past. I was surprised since I didn't think she needed to apologize because our parents, not her, were the source of my problems. But she clarified that her recent altercation with them had caused her to consider what she had done. Even though she knew our parents preferred her, she felt bad about how she had treated me in the past and for never challenging them. She regretted not doing more to address the dynamic, which she was aware of. I urged her not to be ridiculous, but she wanted to apologize for never defending me. What could she have done, really? Our parents, not her, were the issue. She acknowledged that she let things proceed the way our parents desired, but she stated she should have stood up for me. Although I truly appreciated her addressing it, I informed her that I didn't blame her and that she didn't need to feel sorry. She then began to explain to me why she and our parents were currently at odds. She got engaged to her boyfriend, which apparently upset them because they thought it was too soon after her divorce. They were concerned about what people might think and felt that it was inappropriate to think of getting married again so soon. But my sister didn't give a damn about such views. She clarified that she had lost interest in her ex-husband even prior to her divorce. Before she found out about his affair, they had been dragging their marriage along for more than a year. Their relationship had ended a long time ago, and she believed that our parents were being self-centered by expecting her to put off moving on because they were afraid of rumors. Since it's common to move on after a broken marriage, I don't think anyone would find this circumstance intriguing enough to engage in gossip. Her timing is perfectly acceptable. She was also arguing with them about having kids, as if that wasn't awful enough. She is an independent woman who does not owe our parents grandchildren, therefore I found it incomprehensible that she was still answerable to them for her own choices. In spite of this, our parents were fighting about her decision to forgo having children. Our mom tried to persuade our dad that at least her plan to remarry meant she would have children soon, while they were discussing whether it was right for her to get engaged so quickly. She even mentioned my sister's biological clock, saying it was time for her to consider starting a family. My sister had to explain, of course, that she had no intention of having children, not now, not ever. She planned to live a completely childless life. Our parents were even more horrified by this discovery. Her decision to stay childless simply served to exacerbate their already irritated feelings about her hasty engagement. They haven't spoken to each other since this argument got out of hand and caused a significant fallout. My sister broke down at the restaurant while she was telling me this. It was obvious that she wasn't managing the issue effectively. I did everything in my power to console her. Since she had dedicated her entire life to avoiding failing our parents, I could see how difficult it must be for her. She actually said that even when she started experiencing problems in her first marriage, she continued to be in the poisonous relationship because our parents didn't believe that divorce was the answer. Clearly, that marriage had not ended well. Before his affair ended the marriage, her ex-husband had been poisonous, and they had fought nearly every day. My sister made the decision to go her own way this time, even if it meant disappointing our parents. Even though she genuinely loved them and didn't want to lose them, she informed me that she couldn't keep living her life according to their wishes, particularly when it came to important choices like marriage and having kids. Our parents had attempted to persuade her that having a kid would resolve all of their marital issues in her prior marriage. She claimed that because her ex-husband was so toxic, having a kid with him would have simply made matters worse, thus she had escaped a bullet. She told me that she had never wanted children in the first place and that she had made a lot of choices just to appease our parents. For instance, rather than following her own interests, She chose to study business in college because it was what they desired. Our parents had controlled every aspect of her life, and now she simply desired to live her life as she saw fit. I felt terrible for her as she broke down and started crying as I tried to console her. After years of stress and hardship, this mature woman was finally crumbling. I came to see how foolish it had been of me to believe that her life was ideal. Our parents put a lot of pressure on her, and she had been fighting to survive all the time. That same pressure has also caused a rift between us along the way. I made the decision to stop it. We had already squandered too much time acting as though we were unrelated to one another. In actuality, we were sisters, and our parents had destroyed our bond. I refused to allow them to continue to rule our lives. I assured my sister that she could now confide in me about anything. After so many years of avoiding me, I was happy that she had decided to speak with me. I informed her that she didn't need to allow our parents to make her feel bad, because she wasn't doing anything wrong. I encouraged her, telling her she didn't need our parents' approval anymore, and gave her a pep talk. Following their wishes hadn't exactly worked out for her in the past, as evidenced by her first marriage, and she was mature enough to make her own decisions. Even while I couldn't promise that her new marriage would work out, I assured her that if it did, at least she would be responsible for it and not have to hold anyone else accountable. I also mentioned that our parents had come to see me recently in an effort to patch things up. They obviously didn't come to truly apologize or mend our relationship. They were attempting to take advantage of their second chance with my family after realizing they wouldn't have grandchildren from my sister. This insight made my blood boil. I won't allow them to treat my son like a placeholder because he is not. My sister looked scared when I told her about our parents' visit. The timing was simply too shady. They arrived at my home attempting to infiltrate my son's life when they abruptly discovered that their favorite daughter would not be bearing them grandchildren anytime soon. My sister concurred that it was suspicious and assured me that I had made the right decision in refusing to let them in or extend forgiveness. Even if I had been thinking about forgiving them if they apologized after this, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm glad I chose to have lunch with my sister that day to work things out. Despite my initial skepticism, I'm actually happy I accepted the lunch at all. I discovered many things I should have known, but most all, I came to the conclusion that my sister's life was not as idyllic as I had always thought. For me, this changed everything. My in-laws are aware of what I said to my sister, and I have discussed everything with my husband. Since it's obvious that my parents weren't here with the best of intentions, they are adamantly opposed to me making amends with them now. Their hidden agendas were repulsive. My sister and I have stayed in contact ever since. Despite her initial wish for reconciliation, she has made the decision to completely cut off contact with our parents. She acknowledged they didn't deserve it after talking to me. They not only mistreated me, but they also put a lot of pressure on her for years. She informed me that she didn't even know who she truly was for a long time because she had spent so much of her life trying to please them. It may sound cheesy, but for her, that's the real deal. She's had enough now though, and I'm happy that she's standing up for herself. We both need our parents to keep their distance and let us live our lives as we see fit. They've caused enough harm. Third update. My sister and I have been corresponding daily for the past 5 weeks since our lunch date. Sincerely, we both needed this but were unaware of it until now, so I'm extremely happy that we're getting back in touch. We were both made aware of how horribly our parents treated us by that lunch talk. Our parents made another attempt to get in touch with us last week. Since we've blocked them everywhere else, they sent us an email. Even still, their tone was patronizing, as though they were reaching out to us as a favor. We responded that we didn't need that and asked them to avoid us before blocking them once more. We both spent a lot of time attempting to gain their favor, but it's obvious now that we can't win with them. We no longer want to be good daughters to them because they weren't good parents to either of us. We cut them off entirely after sending them our last response. They haven't made another attempt to get in touch since. I hope they leave us alone at last. That negativity is not what I want in my life. They are awful people in addition to being bad parents. I'm glad I stopped seeing them years ago. Because she was so devoted to them, it has been more difficult for my sister. In all honesty, though, it seems more like Stockholm Syndrome. I'm here to support her while she deals with it now. We've become much closer, and I'm even helping to organize her wedding. It says a lot. All I can hope for is that everything goes smoothly and that our parents stay out of it. Fourth update. Last week my sister got married. I had a great time serving as a bridesmaid. They kept it quiet and small. I don't see why my parents couldn't get along with her husband. He seems like a wonderful man. My sister seemed to be truly content in this relationship, therefore it's their loss. They were obviously very happy at the wedding. It's really pitiful that our parents were unable to approve of this because they were worried about what unimportant people would think. My sister and I are clearly getting along well these days. We're actually quite close friends, I'd say. Our parents haven't contacted us in a while. They informed us via email approximately 5 months ago that they were giving everything to charity and that we shouldn't expect an inheritance because we are ungrateful brats. I'm not sure why they felt the need to inform us of that or what they anticipated would occur next. They must be disappointed that we didn't go pleading for their pardon, but it doesn't matter to anyone. I'm content with my life, my son, my spouse, and my in-laws, who are far superior to my parents. My sister is content with her spouse as well. Our parents are free to remain alone and stew in their resentment and hatred. It's really their loss. I was caught in a mistake, and my colleague took advantage of the situation to sabotage my interests. Am I the asshole for deciding to report it to the police? I've, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, officially had it, and I'm commencing a campaign of, relatively benign, psychological warfare against one of my coworkers. I'll call him Dan. Dan started at the company on November 23 and seemed cool at first, but I have slowly grown to find him very annoying. There are too many examples to get into, but I would describe him as an entitled, impertinent sourpuss with a nicotine addiction and a self-professed problem with following the rules. WTF, why would you brag about this at work? He is my same age and role. FTR, I also arguably have a nicotine addiction, but I don't make it obvious in my fucking place of work. So, a few days ago I regrettably had a horrifying emergency on my way into work. The whole ordeal unfolded very quickly, and while I was unmuted on a work call with my whole team. I don't want to go into details of the emergency, but it involved me getting caught up in an altercation that had nothing to do with me but resulted in me having a very public panic attack that my entire work team also heard over the phone. I am diagnosed with panic disorder. Edit. I am not supposed to discuss the details of this situation, as it is an open case with local law enforcement. On my way to work, I was arrested, and I was held in jail for 36 hours. I had a panic attack while being arrested, and then 5 more while I was in jail because I was denied access to my prescribed medications. You can pass your judgment on whether I deserved it, but you don't fucking know me. My other coworkers, my family, my friends, and the larger local community, not the cops, have been extremely supportive. Think what you want, but fuck the police, and I will probably never be able to trust them again. I was indisposed for a couple of days after the emergency, and once I was able to return, my work computer was still in my office building, which I ultimately never reached, so I couldn't do any actual work beyond sending emails, little messages off my phone. Almost all of my coworkers, who I've worked with for about 7 years now at this company, were incredibly supportive, sent me kind messages, and were generally concerned for my well-being, having directly heard me go through this ordeal in real time, and I still feel mortified, so their support really means the world. A few coworkers even contacted every single person I had scheduled meetings with to let them know I had an emergency. They seamlessly picked up my critical work tasks, and offered to drop off my computer at home for me. I mean, these people rock, and that's why I've been at the company for 7 years. Dan, however, has appeared to have seized upon this opportunity, my traumatic emergency, to highlight my shortcomings. In the immediate aftermath of the emergency, when my coworkers were exchanging messages of support and concern about me, Dan sent no such messages, and he didn't ask how he could support. Instead, he inserted an absolutely useless recommendation into the team group chat about how I could have avoided this emergency in the first place. He immediately tried to turn my trauma into a learning moment, as if it was so obvious that this would have happened to me because of the choices I made leading up to it. She was asking for it in that dress, if you ask me. Gross. Then, I am finally recuperated enough to look at my phone a couple days after the emergency. I get a message from a PM that I work with, asking me about the status of a report that I had put Dan in charge of. The PM tells me that they spoke with Dan yesterday, and that Dan said the report was in my court. But interestingly enough, Dan conveniently failed to mention to the PM during that conversation that I had suffered a major emergency, that Dan had witnessed just the day before, that I was presently indisposed, and that I would likely need some time to recover. Not to mention, Dan had never communicated to me prior to the emergency that the report was ready for me to review. He kept saying he had one more task to complete, so fuck him. Despite the chaos and trauma of that terrible event, I feel a renewed sense of gratitude for my life, my freedom, and the everyday privilege of being alive and surrounded by a supportive community. And I feel even more protective of it now. Things can change in an instant in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine. I truly do not have any more time for bullshit. And for this reason, I feel absolutely justified in canceling Dan from my life. I'm not gonna try to get him fired or anything like that. But I refuse to spend my days in close proximity to him at the office. We currently sit right next to each other in a 2-desk office space, but there are other desks in an adjacent office space that I can use, so I plan to move my desk away from his. He can say goodbye to any and all opportunities to support me on my projects. I no longer trust him to be a reliable and respectful team player. And most importantly, if he decides to confront me, which he might because he's actually alarmingly confrontational, I will calmly explain to him that I find his professionalism and working style to be unaligned with what I'm looking for in my projects and in my career. He'll have to find someone else to work with. Good luck, you piece of shit. Comments. Comment. Fuck it, sink him. Communicate to the PM his messages about one more task to complete and express your surprise that he didn't mention this when the PM asked him about it, especially with his awareness that you would be unavailable for several days, then disengage from him in the workplace. Oopie. This is precisely the plan. Thank you for your support. Comment. Crucify him the first chance you get. Throw him under the bus every chance you have. Shine a light on his mistakes, failures, shortcomings, and make him look as bad as he tried to make you look. Good luck, and I hope you're doing better now. Oop. Absolutely diabolical. I love it. Thank you, I am feeling much better. A few more tough days ahead, I'm afraid, but I'm taking it day by day. Comment. You are an inspiration. I am sending Grandma hugs your way. Ope. Aw. Thank you so much. Comment. You're very welcome. I'm so sorry you had to go through such a traumatic event. And honestly, as a mother of 3 daughters, I am so incredibly impressed with how you are handling all this. Well done. OP. OMG, I'm the oldest of 3 daughters. I was almost like, wait, Mom? LOL. My mom isn't a grandma quite yet, soon though. Comment. LOL. I'm actually not a grandma either. My daughters are more than old enough, but I have 2 of them that are like no way at all. And my oldest is like maybe in the next couple of years. So I always say I'll send your grandma hugs because I'm old enough to be one. But I honestly could care less if I ever become. Not because it makes me feel old or anything. But I absolutely don't want my kids to think somehow my life revolves around them or what they do with their lives or me being a grandma. If they want kids, I want them to have them. If they don't, I couldn't care less. Which I must admit seems so shocking to ladies my age. Because when I tell them this, they look at me like, how can you say that? I just have a great time with my daughters. I think they are funny and smart and intelligent. They are amazing people in their own right. I just love spending time with them. Oop. You sound just like my mom. Thanks for your words of encouragement. OOP clarifies what got her arrested. It definitely wasn't an accident. But I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was profiled as someone the police wanted to target, and they targeted me without bothering to check themselves. Having spent 36 hours in jail talking with multiple other women, you would be surprised at how many people are there without having any idea why, and it's not 'cause they're on drugs. Since you asked, I was trying to help someone and was mistakenly, and forcibly, arrested by police while they were raiding a protest that I was not taking part in. The protest was right outside my office building, which I was trying to get to. I was thrown in jail for 36 hours, which is why I was indisposed. I wasn't given access to my prescribed medication, and in addition to the panic attack I suffered during the arrest, I had about 5 more over the next 12 hours, all while being totally ignored and laughed at by officers who are supposed to keep me safe. By the time I got out of jail, I was a zombie and I couldn't even spell my own name. Also, my job does involve manual labor. I work on construction sites, install wells, and perform sampling. I'm trained to operate man lifts, nuclear density gauges, and handle hazardous substances. Man, y'all are just... wow. Update. 2 months later, felt like posting an update. See original post. All my charges, 4 misdemeanors for resisting arrest, were dismissed because the police arrested me unlawfully. I am also moving forward with civil litigation against the police department. I thought about just dropping it and moving on with my life, but then I saw the police body cam footage and it is disturbing to say the least. Worse than I even remembered. It brought my partner and father to tears. They are not criers. My mother was simply hysterical and couldn't even get through the first few minutes. She said watching her child be held down and beaten while I was crying and screaming for help was entirely too much for her to bear. I'm shaking again, even recounting it now. Dan still works at my company, but we don't work together on anything anymore. I heard he got put on a PIP, but no one really confirmed that me, which is probably the appropriate course of action. I just stay out completely of his business. I'm doing great at work. I've always felt good about my job performance. BC, as I mentioned in the original post, I love my coworkers and my work really matters to me. I also stopped drinking, quit smoking and am currently 10 days sober, which has been amazing for my productivity and my mental health. Still addicted to nicotine, damn zins, but that's the next thing to go. Taking it one step at a time. Thanks to all the kind internet strangers for your support. Apparently my story will soon be made public to the media, but hopefully you don't hear about it because the video is still mortifying for me, even though I clearly did nothing wrong, other than panic, which isn't really wrong, given the circumstances. Plus then my identity will be exposed and I'll have to make a new Reddit account. Hope Dan doesn't have Reddit and finds this, but at this point he knows what I think about him. Hi, Dan. Comments. Reasonable star 959. It will all work out. You have a good attitude, despite the awful ordeal you experienced. If it happens to be made public, the people who care about you are who matter. Great for you for quitting drinking and smoking. That's amazing. Keep on going one step at a time, one day at a time. Take care, we're pulling for you. My cousin asked my daughter to perform at her wedding, but after her success, she became jealous and posted negatively about her online. Original post. I hope this is okay to share here. The reason I'm posting is because of my daughter who's been hurting in the aftermath of a recent performance. I'm sorry in advance for how long this turned out, but any advice from fellow aerialists would be greatly appreciated. My cousin Dana, not real name, had her wedding 2 weeks ago, and she asked if my daughter could perform at her reception. My daughter, Jane, also fake name, has practiced silks lyra for the past few years at a nearby circus studio, and she's also performed with and through the studio at small gigs. She hopes to continue into adulthood and become a professional teacher, but this recent incident has shaken her confidence. She has a private Instagram to document her progress, shot performances, and I only post certain performances on my Facebook. Her first gig with the studio and her first recital, to name a few, we're proud of. Some of our relatives saw her performances through my socials, and they watched her perform at her studio's Christmas recital when we hosted Christmas at our home a few years back. Something that surprised her when they visited early to see her. I love how they coordinated that, and Jane said it was her loudest cheering section to date. Dana was one of the relatives who came up early to see her Christmas recital, and she's always been super supportive. She asked me if Jane would be willing to perform at the reception, and I asked on her behalf. Jane was honored and excited when I did, and we already had a portable rig for her too. Though we ended up renting a taller one from her studio. Dana got the idea from a YouTube video featuring an aerialist who performed at a wedding reception, and she showed us while requesting white silks and a white outfit. We scoped out the venue and purchased white silks along with a white costume that Dana approved of, and Jane was really excited throughout. Jane even worked on choreography to a song that Dana requested, and she put a lot of time into it, even asking one of her coaches to help her with it. Dana insisted on paying her for the gig despite Jane not expecting to be paid, and she paid her a few hundred. However, Dana's had a change of heart. Jane received a standing ovation after her performance that surprised her, but we didn't know anything was wrong until Dana went on Facebook a few days later. Dana said she didn't approve of the outfit Jane wore and that she specifically told her to not wear white. She also said my husband and I pressured her to have Jane perform and that the performance gave off an unclassy vibe, lies that my husband and I couldn't believe. We sent Dana numerous costume links, and we purchased the one she liked. There was also nothing wrong with Jane's performance. Dana was one of the people cheering afterward. Jane received nothing but compliments afterward, but I'm disgusted that she had to see that post after all the work she put into it. The post also had comments disabled for what it's worth. I called Dana to confront her about the lies, but she didn't pick up numerous calls. I then called her parents who, like us, had received messages about her post, and they said that Dana was wrong. They apologized on her behalf and said they were also disgusted. Dana's mom also said that Dana vented to her before making her post a few days after the reception. Dana told her she regretted asking Jane to perform given the attention, compliments and cheers she received for it. Her mom also said that she felt upstaged with Jane wearing white and having to hear how good she was. Dana's parents tried to call her after she made her post, but she didn't answer after their previous conversation ended with her parents telling her she shouldn't be bitter because she specifically asked Jane to perform. Dana's parents reported the post along with us others, and we've told the truth to those who reached out along with a post to explain our side, stand up for Jane. We have text proof of sending costume links that Dana chose from. Dana's parents also requested to talk to Jane on the phone to apologize for Dana's behavior, and my husband and I told Jane that Dana was wrong, and that we'll be distancing ourselves from Dana permanently. Dana's parents were surprised at her behavior, and we were too, having seen her grow up. Granted, we only see extended family for Thanksgiving and Christmas because we live far, but other relatives were surprised too as it seemed to come from left field. Maybe there's a side of Dana we'll never know from our limited holiday milestone interactions, but our focus is Jane. We've tried to cheer Jane up by offering to take her to dinner among other activities, but she's been hurting, which is why I'm here. Jane hasn't practiced, at home or the studio, since the reception, and I don't want to invade her space at her studio by telling anyone there, in case she doesn't want anyone to know. She asked me to return the white silks and costume after being so excited to receive them. She also said she's going to take an extended break from aerial photography to reconsider if she wants to continue. Aside from aerial photography, she's taken a break from seeing non-aerial friends too, choosing to pretty much keep to herself. We would appreciate any advice from fellow aerialists on how to lift her spirits. We remind her of how we're proud of her, along with the many compliments she received, but she's asked for space and to not talk about it. We're going to respect that and let time do its thing, but we'll consider any advice from other aerialists who can relate to the time and work she put in. Sorry for this being so long, but we appreciate anyone who reads and takes the time to reply. Comments from the first post. Leslie Barbnope. I always see aerialists in white at weddings. Take comfort in the internet OP and hopefully they can use it as a defense with Dana. If she wants to be that way, just post the receipts of how she asked her what to wear, etc. if she's willing to say that for a 16-year-old. Or let it go, it'll pass because I promise Dana, we'll have some new crazy thing to do very soon. These types always do. First update. Before I get into what's happened since my last post, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment. 2 pieces of advice really stood out, and I'll get to them shortly. Since my original post, Dana's Facebook post is gone. I don't know if she deleted it or enough people reported it for Facebook to remove it, but we're glad it's gone. She never apologized to us, or Jane, or even bothered to call, so our position on being permanently done with Dana stands. My husband and I made a post on my Facebook addressing the lies she spewed about our daughter, and we shared photo proof of Dana's texts where she approved of Jane's white costume from links we sent, not to mention the song choice she sent us to. Better yet, Dana's mother reposted it on her account, which really surprised me. Dana's mother wrote that they loved Jane's act and that they disapproved of Dana's actions. My husband and I also made sure that Jane was okay with us addressing it on Facebook, and she said it was fine. Normally, I wouldn't use Facebook to address drama if aimed at me. But since this involves a grown adult attacking a minor, we felt the need to address it publicly because she disparaged her publicly, and Jane will remember whether we stood up for her or not years from now. I had a chance to speak with Dana's mother since my original post on the phone, and she spoke to Dana again after our last call. Dana reiterated how she regretted asking Jane to perform, but she harped on the standing ovation that bothered her the most. Dana told her that she expected Jane to get some polite applause, but that the overwhelming response really set her over the edge because she expected the loudest cheers to be when she and her husband entered the reception, but that went to Jane instead. Dana and her husband also received a great reception when they entered the reception, but Jane's performance did too, and Dana didn't expect it. Heck, even Jane was surprised by it too. She never received a standing ovation from a solo act before. But Dana's mother believes that if Dana had asked someone to sing who received a similar reception, Dana's jealousy would have been all the same. Someone suggested seeing if Jane would be interested in speaking to a therapist given how hurtful Dana's comments could be for a teen, and Jane said she's open to it so long as it isn't a counselor at school because, as of now, she doesn't want anyone at school or her studio to know about the incident, and she vaguely told the coach who helped her choreograph that it went fine. We will respect her privacy request as it's her right to control the narrative. But in the same vein, I suggested therapy for Dana to Dana's mother since her reaction might be a bigger insecurity, and she said she'd ask. The other thing someone suggested was the possibility of Dana's husband, or anyone, making an inappropriate comment to Jane during the reception that made her shut down and not want to see friends or practice days before Dana's post. My husband decided to ask her, and Jane said no when he did. If something happened, perhaps she'd be more comfortable telling a therapist with time. But on the bright side, she said she might want to try a different aerial studio because she doesn't want to answer questions about how it went, or share a video, at her home studio, so we will help her find somewhere new as she asked. We hope she doesn't permanently leave her current studio because she has friends and coaches who are supportive, and she performs with that studio's troupe at festivals gigs. But I personally understand the need to sometimes go somewhere where nobody knows you for a break, and we hope that that will help her. She hasn't said definitely yet. But if we do, we'll take her. She still wants an extended break from aerial photography in the meantime. But even if when she goes back, she said she may never want to perform again and would rather do it leisurely, one of the reasons she doesn't want to return to her home studio where she's a part of their troupe. She asked if we'd tell her troupe coach that she won't perform with them anymore if it comes to it. And if that's what she wants down the road, then we will. Hopefully time heals this wound and helps her at least keep the friends she has there, but we can only hope. Comments from the first Boru. Fleetsd. Other than Dana, it's really nice to see a bunch of adults behaving admirably in support of Jane. I hope Jane is able to heal and not lose something she's loved doing because of one mean-spirited individual. Drya Duanath. Yeah, it is truly weird how often, on this sub, we see people making excuses for or outright encouraging terrible behavior. This was a welcome change. Basic Bichette. Also, OOP didn't take this to an advice subreddit but to a subreddit dedicated to the sport. Cake for PM. Honestly, I do think that is key. It's a very specific subject and asking for advice from other performers. Karate and Pop-Tarts. This is the key. I'm an aerialist as well, and a member of the sub who's been following that story. We're a pretty small community and very, very protective of other aerialists, especially younger girls. It's also an inclusive sport and not super competitive, which I think lends to cooler heads. Slovenly Muse. This is a hugely important underlying fact, I think. That these people are all family. If Dana had hired an aerialist off of whatever Craigslist is now, they probably would have received polite applause that didn't upstage the bride. But Jane was family, and the guests were mostly family, which makes them extra excited to see a young person in the family doing so well, and they're not just impressed with her performance, they're proud of her. Hence the standing ovation. But this also means that when Dana lashes out at the aerialist, she's bad-mouthing Jane to Jane's own family. Her wedding guests are not going to automatically side with Dana, because they're Jane's family too. And with the receipts out there, this isn't going to go well for Dana at all. I guess you could see this as a lesson about keeping firm boundaries between personal and professional engagements, but really, I think the main takeaway here is to avoid marrying a crazy person whenever possible. Last update. When I tried to make each past post, they were immediately removed for some reason. Thus why I asked Madison Brave to post on my behalf after a few failed attempts on my original and update posts. I was able to make a post to my own profile stating that I gave Madison permission to post on my behalf. But when I tried to add this final update, my account was suspended as soon as I hit post, and I'm guessing I tried too many times to repost it along with the many attempts on my original and update too. I have since made a new account and reached out to the mods for assistance posting my last update after Madison suggested that I reach out to them instead of constantly reposting it previously, and they were gracious enough to help me. This is going to be the last time I update, and I want to thank everyone who gave advice. In my last post, I mentioned that Jane said she'd be open to talking to a professional so long as it wasn't anyone from her school, and we agreed to accommodate her. However, she changed her mind shortly after and said she wanted to talk to her coach instead, whom she had been brushing off since the reception and being vague about how it went. She and her coach put a lot of time into choreographing the act for Dana, and she didn't even charge her for the sessions to do so. Her coach is also part of her Circus Studios performing troupe, and she has always been supportive and understanding. We supported her decision to talk with her coach, and they did in person. It was after they spoke that Jane spoke to me following her coach's suggestion to do so, and I'm going to be somewhat vague about certain details of our discussion. She also asked to speak to me first before we'd talk to my husband afterward, and that's what we did. Jane opened up about how Dana sent a private message to her Instagram the day after the reception, but to her personal Instagram and not the private circus one. Dana's private message was just as bitter as her Facebook posts, but much more hurtful. Dana called Jane derogatory sexual terms in her message, and I can't express how angry my husband and I still are. Jane said she was surprised upon receiving the message. Dana was always supportive of her craft, and she gave her a standing ovation along with her husband. Looking back, Dana probably did because everyone else was doing so. But Dana also wrote that she only received the ovation because they were family who were biased, and couldn't tell the difference between a good and bad aerialist. Jane blocked Dana long before we spoke, and she said she was hurt because Dana was one of the relatives who came up for Christmas early when he hosted some years back to attend her studio's Christmas recital, which surprised her, and we all went out to dinner afterwards too. My husband and I tried our best to remind her that Dana's reaction was a reflection of her insecurities rather than anything Jane did. If the best man gave a speech that garnered the same reaction, Dana would have directed her vitriol at him. Jane said she understood that it wasn't her fault, but there was more in Dana's message that hurt her confidence, such as bodily comments that were disgusting. She said she may return to aerial at some point, but that she still needs time and is unsure about performing again compared to doing it leisurely. We told her, among other things, that we commended her decision to speak with her coach and that we'll respect her ultimate decision. Jane also said that she didn't tell us immediately because she wasn't sure if she wanted further drama with Dana if we told her parents about her message. However, after some time, she said she actually wanted us to tell them because she felt that Dana deserved repercussions for it. She said she was surprised that Dana's parents called her out publicly, on Facebook, without knowing about the message, So that made her feel comfortable with us telling them. Jane also saved a screenshot of Dana's message. And while we agreed to tell her parents, we suggested that she delete it afterwards because it's not good to carry around hurtful things. She's also still open to speaking to a professional about the other stuff in Dana's message that's more hurtful so long as it's no one from her school. We are in the process of trying to find a therapist who can help with some of the infidelities that led to her shutdown in the weeks after the performance. I honestly cannot thank her coach enough, but I just want to touch on a few more things that were suggested in the comments. I received a few DMs saying we were just as bad as Dana for addressing Dana's lies on Facebook, so I want to be clear. My husband and I rarely use Facebook. And if someone had started drama with me on a Facebook post, I wouldn't use Facebook to address it personally. I'd opt for a call instead. But since she disparaged a minor publicly with lies regarding costumes that we had text proof of her approving, we felt the need to post those messages proving that she signed off on them, and we asked Jane if she was okay with it first. The other thing a few people asked was whether her costume was potentially inappropriate. The costume we purchased came from a website that many professional circus performers use, including some who used to be in Cirque du Soleil and tag the shop while wearing it on their socials. And we purchased other costumes from there in the past. Heck, some of their costumes have been used in wedding gigs by hired circus performers too. Jane's costume also received many compliments, but we're glad Jane realizes that she isn't responsible for Dana's insecurities. This was also Jane's first negative experience in her young performing career. Despite knowing Dana is entirely at fault, her words still hurt as they were close before this. Jane has kept in contact with her coach since, and she's even considering a different apparatus to take her mind off of silks that are temporarily tainted. We hope that time and therapy will help her with whatever she chooses, but her coach has also floated the idea of organizing a hangout with her troupe completely outside of aerial like a zipline, rope course day to get her mind off of it while seeing her friends, and she said she'd be open to it. Dana's parents also sent Sherry's berries for Jane, which was really sweet, and Jane sent them a text to thank them too. Regarding Dana's parents, I discussed the private message with Dana's mother, and she was even more disgusted than before. She said that she and her husband would deal with it and that there'd be permanent changes to their relationship with Dana until she apologizes and then some. She also apologized to us on her behalf and said she didn't raise her to be like that. But for what it's worth, even before we mentioned Dana's message, she told me that Dana's husband wasn't thrilled with her Facebook post, among other things Dana complained about regarding the wedding, things that I had no clue about. She also said she's not sure if they'll be together much longer due to other things going on too, but I'll keep this to Jane only and hope that she comes back to aerial someday, or even a different apparatus if she chooses. Comments from the last update. We all love dogs. Geez, I'm so sorry your daughter had to deal with that horrible message on top of everything else. I am glad everyone but Dana seems to be behaving reasonably and trying to support Jane through this. Honestly, Dana's behavior kind of goes beyond insecure and mean, and into completely inexplicably evil territory. Not that you owe Dana anything, but, especially if she was previously kind and supportive to your daughter, Dana's parents should for sure look into trying to get her some professional help too. If there's been no indication at all of her being this cruel, out of control previously, and it's seeming out of character to everyone who knows her, including her parents and husband, is there a legitimate chance that she's experiencing a real psychiatric problem? Obviously not your responsibility and not an excuse, but something that those who care about her might want to consider. My husband planned a dinner with his ex, made me feel like the rebound, and now our marriage is falling apart. Original post. Throwaway account. I really need input from people who don't know us, so their opinions aren't biased. I'm very emotional and tired, so I apologize in advance for any typos. My husband, Jack, male, 36, used to date Emma, female, 34, for years. They broke up because Jack didn't want to get married or have kids. Emma moved away, and about a month later, Jack met me, 30. I don't look like the typical girls Jack had been dating. For example, Emma is super tall, blonde with blue eyes, and has a PhD. I'm petite, 110 pounds and short. I'm a nurse, I have dark curly hair, and I'm an introvert. Apparently, she was a social butterfly. Jack has a group of friends that he's known since childhood. They are like brothers to him, but from the very beginning, they didn't like me. They still call me the rebound girl. At our wedding, during his best man speech, he joked, "We all thought rebound girls were temporary, but our brother Jack made an honest woman out of her." Everyone laughed. I didn't. They also joked that I'm just a nurse, and that Jack downgraded, since he has a PhD, technically postdoctoral. From a doctor to just a nurse. For my own sanity, I ignore them, and Jack still hangs out with them regularly. Last weekend, There was a fundraising gala, and Emma was there. I saw her for the first time in person. Jack introduced me, and Emma said, "Yeah, I know who she is." The guys weren't kidding when they described her. Haha. Jack quickly changed the topic and asked how long she was in town. She said for a week, and then they ended up chatting all night, reminiscing about old times. I decided to talk to other people. Later, at bedtime, Jack mentioned that he should go out to dinner with Emma. I assumed he meant inviting her over, so I asked what kind of food she likes so I could make it. He said no, it would just be the two of them. I asked, like a date? And he replied, no, just two friends going to dinner. Why are you so insecure? I asked him, do you miss her? Do you miss being with her? He said, I'm not going to lie, it felt great talking to her tonight. There's just something about her. I got really upset and told him he can do whatever he wants, but if he goes on this dinner date, I'm done. He thinks I'm overreacting and being insecure. So, wise people of Reddit, is this rebound girl overreacting? Update. It's 4:45 a.m., and I didn't sleep last night. I thought I'd post an update. I decided to stay awake and talk to him when he came home. When he did, I told him, I could have tracked your location, shown up at the restaurant, and done so many things to get my answer. But I'd like to believe you have enough respect for me to tell me. Were you on a dinner date with your friends or Emma? He showed me pictures and said, no, it was all of us, me, my friends, and Emma. I was stupid enough to feel relieved, even feeling bad for accusing him. Then he told me to sit down because we needed to talk. He said that after seeing Emma at the gala, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He decided to take Monday and Tuesday, yesterday, off and spent the whole day with her, while I assumed he was at work. He went on about how strong their connection was, how they couldn't stop talking, and how much he enjoyed being with her. He told me I'm a sweet woman, but he never felt that spark with me. He said that at dinner, Emma was laughing and having fun with everyone, and it felt like old times, compared to me being quiet and uncomfortable around his friends. He said it's best if we go our separate ways. I asked him if they had sex, and he didn't reply. I asked again and again, but he still wouldn't answer. I was so upset and asked, why did you marry me if you're not over her? He said he thought I was the one, but these past 2 days made him realize there's no spark between us. He kept going on about how sweet I am and that I'll find someone too. I told him to shut up. I said, Emma knew about your cancer treatments. Where was she when you needed a friend? Why didn't she ever call you back then? He went quiet. I feel stupid for ignoring all the red flags over the years and wasting 6 years of my life with him. My next step is hiring a lawyer and finding my own place. I feel so numb right now. I'm going to contact my brother to help me. Thank you everyone. Ken Specs brings guest for sleepover if his name on the house title October 23, 2024. I will see a lawyer soon. My ex and I got into a huge argument tonight. We share a house that we are currently living in. He sleeps in our bedroom, I sleep in the spare room. He told me tonight that he wants his girlfriend to stay with him, yes at our house, while she is in town. Can I legally call the police to kick her out? Or since the house is under his name too, he can bring anyone and cops can't do anything. I suggested he moves out so he can invite whoever he wants, but he doesn't want to pay mortgage for our current house and rent, for a place he would be staying. Update 3. So many people have asked for an update. There isn't much to share except that my ex has been extremely difficult. He and his affair partner, AP, took time off work. They are traveling and having fun. He refuses to respond to or acknowledge me. I no longer have access to his money. I'm working extra shifts to cover the mortgage. I've met with 2 lawyers, but I realized I can't afford their fees. Thankfully, I have access to free legal advice sessions through my Employee Assistance Program, EAP, at work, so I'm currently on the waiting list for it. I'm planning to send him the bill for half of the house expenses since we separated. Meanwhile, he's out traveling, and I'm working overtime to pay the mortgage. I can't put the house on the market because I need his signature on the papers too. So, basically, no real update on my situation. His family has pretty much ghosted me. His mom initially acted sympathetic but then stopped replying. His friends never liked me, so that isn't much of a surprise. On the bright side, I do have an empty house now. I love how quiet and peaceful it is. I can cry for hours without worrying that anyone will see me. Edit. Yes, Emma knows he can't get her pregnant. I thought I was clever by telling her, their long-term plan is either adoption or using a sperm donor IVF. I felt disgusted hearing about it because adoption was our plan. Now, it's his and her plan. I am not the original poster. Please don't contact or comment on linked posts. My mom remarried, brought in her husband and stepdaughter, who insulted me and damaged my things. Now, they seized my house during my trip. It never occurred to me, 27 degrees Fahrenheit, that I would write an article like this, yet here we are. It all began when I was seated in our living room and informed by my parents that they were divorcing. I was already living with them, saving money, and working a regular office job. There was no fighting or yelling during the divorce. It was just two people who had grown apart and had different goals in life. I think I handled it quite well because I had anticipated it. They were living parallel lives under one roof, and family dinners had grown infrequent. I continued our pizza and sci-fi movie habit by spending every other weekend with Dad, 59 million, who moved to an apartment across town. A year after the divorce, Mom, 59F, met my now stepfather, 57M, and everything changed drastically. One morning, she was so excited that she virtually floated home. She declared, "I've met someone special," during breakfast. "He has a daughter in college. Wouldn't it be nice to have a sister?" My stepfather and his daughter, 21F, came into our home after they were married in a matter of months. Everything began to come apart at that point. When grown-ups were present, my stepsister might have looked like an angel in her expensive clothing, but when they weren't, she was someone else. Little things were the first. The laundry would destroy my preferred work outfits. Coffee stains would inexplicably appear on important documents. My personal belongings would disappear and then reappear damaged. Even worse was my stepfather, who was often making disparaging comments about my lifestyle, appearance, and professional choices. "Don't you think that skirt's a bit short for the office?" he'd respond. Or, "Maybe if you spent less time on your phone and more time networking, you'd have a better position by now." I attempted to discuss these experiences with Mom, but she consistently dismissed my worries. She'd remark, "He's just being protective. He wants what's best for you." Over time, everything became too much to handle. I had spent weeks honing every element of a pivotal presentation while staying late at work. When I arrived home early one evening, I discovered my stepsister purposely destroying my presentation materials in my room. She had ruined my work with markers, leaving her hands smeared with ink. Things became heated when I confronted her and presented Mom and my stepfather with the evidence. The worst part? My stepfather accused me of mistreating his precious daughter, and called me a stupid. As if I were the one causing the trouble, Mom simply sat there and shook her head at me. I had trouble sleeping that night. I had made up my mind by dawn. Dad arrived to fetch me up 20 minutes after I called him. Mom came out to object as I was packing my things into his truck. She remarked, "You're overreacting? Why can't you just try to get along?" I looked over at her. "Your husband called me a fool, and you sat there silently. Your stepdaughter destroyed my work, and you did nothing. That's not overreacting, that's self-preservation." When Dad heard this, he went up to my stepfather. Security had to step in before things were physical since it heated up so quickly. It was like inhaling fresh air after being submerged when I finally moved in with Dad. It's time to stop being cautious. No more looking for sabotage in my room. A few days later, I received a note from Mom. "I can't believe you set your father against my husband like this. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't answer. Which family was she referring to? The one where I was verbally abused by her husband? Where did her stepdaughter ruin my belongings? I concentrated on my work and saving money rather than obsessing over it. I brought meals from home, while my coworkers went out for fancy lunches. I stayed late and took on more work when others went out to bars after work. I contribute a sizable amount of my monthly salary to my future home fund. I eventually purchased a home with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard where I could grow a garden after 3 years of diligent saving. It was all mine, purchased with my own funds after years of diligent effort and cautious saving. I made the decision to throw a housewarming celebration, and I made it clear that Mom could attend. But not my stepsister or stepfather. She concurred. On the day of the party, however, they were all present when I opened the door. "Surprise?" Mom whispered feebly, observing my face. As soon as he saw the hardwood flooring and crown molding, my stepfather began to critique everything, his lips quivering. His statement, "It's nice," sounded anything but. With her nose in the air, my stepsister walked around teasingly about how little the kitchen was and how she would purchase a larger home with a swimming pool. I was done. "Really? That's interesting. What job are you planning to buy it with?" She flushed. "I have prospects." When I said, "Prospects aren't paychecks. Last I heard, you were still living off your dad's credit card." My stepfather took a menacing stride forward as his face grew scarlet with anger. Mom gave me a pitying glance over her shoulder as she swiftly escorted them out after grabbing his arm. I was trembling with rage as they went, but I also felt oddly relieved. At last, I had confronted them, in my own house, according to my own rules. My true friends joined me in celebrating my accomplishment as the celebration went on. I had assumed that would be the end of it, but I had no idea that things would grow much worse. I have to go to work now, so I'll update this post tomorrow with what transpired. Is it wrong of me to confront them? In my opinion, they showed up to disparage all I've worked so hard for even though they weren't invited. First update? Since then, a lot has transpired, and I feel uneasy about my present circumstances. I had an opportunity when my supervisor called me into his office 3 months after the housewarming catastrophe. For a 2-week absence, our organization needed someone to manage a significant project at another branch. My house, especially my indoor garden, was my biggest worry, even though it was a fantastic opportunity for my job. Delicate orchids, temperamental peace lilies, and my pride and joy, a rare bird of paradise that had just begun to flower, were among the many plants I had grown during the previous few months. I couldn't stomach the idea of going back to dead plants, and each one required a different kind of care. I swallowed my pride and drove to Mom's house after weighing my options. I knew she had a green thumb, but we hadn't talked much since the housewarming incident. In addition, I believed that this might be an opportunity to mend our relationship, just Mom and me, without the involvement of my stepsister or stepfather. When I showed up at her house, she appeared astonished. "Is everything all right?" She ushered me into the kitchen and asked. I asked if she could take care of my house, especially the plants, and explained about the business trip. I should have known something was wrong because of the way her face lit up. "Obviously, with nearly too much enthusiasm," she said. "You are aware of my passion for gardening." I gave her the extra keys and thorough instructions on how to take care of each plant. She tucked the papers away after giving them a fleeting glance. She said, "Don't worry about anything. Simply concentrate on your work. Everything will be well taken care of by me." I dismissed it as my own paranoia, but there was something strange about her actions. What could go wrong after all? I thought she was just observing my plants. I told her my itinerary and emergency contacts before I left. I reminded her that I would be gone for 2 weeks. According to the schedule I jotted down, the plants just require water. Please don't invite anyone over or adjust anything. Although she gave a nod, I couldn't exactly read her face. Obviously, honey, everything will be all right. The fact that she had consented so fast in spite of our previous arguments, that she had hardly looked at the care instructions, and that she kept saying, "Everything will be fine," without addressing the plants directly, were all small details that I began to notice while I was driving home. That night, I double-checked every item in my home. Just in case, I snapped pictures of every room in my house. Despite feeling bad about not trusting my own mother, I even put a tiny security camera in my living room. I noticed Mom's car go by my street the following morning as I was packing my bags to go to the airport. She drove by carefully, as if she was checking something, without stopping or waving. She said she was merely running errands in the area when I later called her about it. I'm now writing this from my downtown hotel room. Even if the project is going well, I still feel nervous. Mom's behavior during our check-in calls has been odd. No matter what time of day I call, she always appears to be at my house. I hear strange background noises, such as TV sounds and clinking plates, which shouldn't be present if she's just dropping over to water some plants. She immediately shifted the topic when I inquired about my bird of paradise. "Everything is all right, try not to worry too much. Simply concentrate on your work." I tried to view the stream from my security camera, but it appears to have been disconnected. While watering plants, Mom says she unintentionally knocked out the cord and was unable to figure out how to plug it back in. Tonight, I spoke with Dad over the phone about my worries. He believes I'm being overly suspicious, but he also brought up Mom's behavior at the housewarming celebration. "My dear," he replied, "keep your eyes wide open. Have faith in your instincts. Even though I still have a week left, I'm thinking of shortening my trip. Am I going overboard? I simply hope I'm mistaken about everything right now." Second update. Well, that was far worse than I had anticipated. Things started to get pretty strange during my second week here, with excuses like, "in the middle of something," or "can't talk right now, everything's fine." My mom stopped returning my calls on a daily basis and instead started texting me back. I heard several people in the background when she finally picked up, including what sounded strangely like my stepsister's chuckle. The social media posts followed. Since I have blocked my stepsister, I don't typically check her accounts, but I received screenshots from a coworker who follows her. Selfies that she posted from what was obviously my kitchen were there. One caption said, "I love my new granite countertops." She was seen relaxing on my couch in another. Watched Netflix while relaxing in my new living room. I was feeling nauseous. She had been posting these for days, according to the timestamps. She responded with heart emojis and the following when her pals inquired about her new location. I finally found my ideal home. I tried contacting mom again right away. Directly to voicemail, I dialed the phone of my stepfather. Blocked. Even my stepsister blocked me when I attempted to phone her. I called my neighbor next door in a desperate attempt to get help. She hesitated before answering, "Oh yes. Over the past week, I've observed your sister moving things. I assumed you were aware. According to your mother, you were allowing her to stay while she recovered." I could hardly hold the phone because my hands were shaking so much. Dad was furious when I called him. "Take the next flight back home," he said. "I'll see you over there." I was able to reserve a red-eye flight, which landed shortly after midnight. The first thing I noticed when the Uber dropped me off at my house, the house I had worked so hard to purchase, was that all of the drapes had been altered. I could see strange decorations and furniture through the windows. I tried my key in the lock with shaking hands. It refused to turn. I made another attempt, this time with more caution. Nothing. Suddenly, the key that had suited my own house perfectly no longer did. At that moment, I heard footsteps strolling around my house as if they were supposed to be there. The door opened before I could call 911, and my stepsister appeared, dressed in pajamas as if she owned the house. She dared to appear irritated at my presence, and her blonde hair was in an untidy bun. "Why are you in this place?" My brain was having trouble processing what I was witnessing, so I said the words in a whisper. "Obviously, living here," she grinned. "I've been here for several weeks. While you were off playing businesswoman, Daddy helped me move in." With my suitcase still in hand, I stood there feeling angry. "This is my home. Leave. Right now." She studied her manicured nails while leaning against my doorframe. "Yes, that isn't taking place. I feel very at ease here. By the way, the water pressure in the bathroom is fantastic. Acquire. Outside. Of course, my own home." Every word had enough edge to pierce. In reaction, she slammed the door in my face and laughed. Really laughed. The latch clicked, and then I heard her footsteps as she left. With my bags all about me, I stood on my own front porch, shaking with anger. The flower beds I had meticulously arranged were illuminated by the yard lights I had put. I could see my living room through the glass, but it was no longer my living room. She tossed her jacket over my couch. My hardwood floors were littered with her shoes. I took out my phone and dialed Mom, my hands shaking. She sounded sleepy as she heard the third ring. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" I nearly let out a yell. "I just got home to find my stepsister living in my house. She says she's been here for weeks. Tell her to get out right now, or I'm calling the police." "Don't contact the police, please." Mom's voice changed from drowsy to frantic. "We'll be over. Just wait there, please. What other place should I go? I can't get out of my own home." The next half hour was the longest I've ever experienced. I watched the lights in the houses next to mine turn on as I paced back and forth on my front porch. Seeing me out here in the middle of the night, what do they think? A few automobiles passed slowly, perhaps debating whether to make their own police call. At last, Mom's vehicle arrived, driven by my stepfather. Still wearing their jammies beneath their coats, they hurried out. "What's happening?" I confronted Mom and made a demand. "Why is my stepsister in possession of my house keys? Why do you allow her to reside here?" At least Mom had the grace to appear uneasy. "She needed a place to stay, honey. She was unable to pay the rent increase when her lease expired. Your home was just sitting there, unoccupied." "Just sitting there? Vacant? It's my home. You weren't entitled." As if it clarified everything, Mom added, "The girl needed somewhere to live. Anyway, your house is too large for one person." I kept my eyes on my mother's face, hoping for some recognition of how totally she had violated my confidence. Rather, she only stood there, offering justifications for the unacceptable. As always when I was younger, my stepfather went forward with his chest puffed out. "Look, telling you about her moving in was pointless. You would have simply refused?" I would have said no, of course. I can't even enter my own home since the locks have been changed. "Anyway, they needed to be changed," he replied, dismissively waving his hand. "I was kind to you." I gaped at him in shock. "You know that's against the law, don't you? Changing the locks on someone else's property is not an option." He sneered. "Legal, illegal. It's finished now. This house is too large for just you, and she needs somewhere to stay." I whispered, lowering my voice to a perilous whisper. "Get her out. Get her out of here or I'll call the cops." That recognizable sneer twisted my stepfather's cheeks. "You're not going to do it." Mom moved forward, her hands clenched. "That's it if you call the police. I'll never talk to you again. Do you want it that way? To utterly ruin this family?" I let forth a rough, acrid laugh. "This family? Do you mean the time you allowed your husband to occupy my home without permission? That household?" Rather than answer, they turned and left me there with my bags as they entered my house. With a last click, the door shut behind them. As I took out my phone, my hands stopped shaking. Don't hesitate any longer. No more attempting to maintain harmony. Even though Dad believes I made the correct decision, I can't get Mom's vow to never talk to me again out of my mind. Third update. When I dialed 911, things proceeded swiftly. 2 police cars with bright lights arrived in less than 20 minutes. I told the officers what was going on, and the neighbors were clearly awake now, watching from behind their curtains. "Are you the legitimate owner?" the officer inquired. Using my phone, I retrieved the property records and screenshots of my stepsister's social media posts demonstrating her move into her new place. I said, "Yes, I do have all the paperwork. I gave my mother a key so she could water my plants while I was gone on business. Rather, they changed all the locks and moved my stepsister in." The doorbell was rung by the officer. After a long silence, there were shuffles coming from within. The door opened at last. As they stood there, my mother, stepfather, and stepsister made a vain attempt to project confidence. "Good evening," said the cop. "Everyone inside must provide identification and proof of residency." My stepfather took the stage, speaking in his most convincing business voice. "There was a miscommunication. My daughter is permitted to remain here by my stepdaughter. She is attempting to stir trouble after they had a falling out." "That is untrue," I interrupted. "I never granted authorization. While I was out on business, they exploited me." "Inquire about the locks. They will acknowledge that they altered them without telling me." The first thing my stepfather said was, "The old locks were defective." "You admit that you changed the locks without the homeowner's consent?" The officer paused to take notes. My stepsister came forward, dread taking the place of her previous arrogance. "Daddy assured me things would be all right. He claimed that after she grew accustomed to the concept, she wouldn't mind. Changing locks on someone else's property and occupying their home without permission constitutes illegal entry," the officer replied, glaring at my stepfather. "We will need to request that you and your daughter visit the station." Mom burst into tears. "This is simply a family issue, please, we can resolve this. Your husband and stepdaughter have admitted to changing locks and occupying property without the owner's consent," the officer sternly retorted. "It is illegal to do so." After that, everything occurred pretty fast. As they escorted my stepsister to the patrol car, she began to cry. For the first time, my stepfather remained silent despite his fury turning his face crimson. As they took her husband and daughter away, Mom shook on the porch. I called an emergency locksmith with the authorities' assistance, and he came an hour later. Mom eventually spoke as he sought to get me back into my own house. "How were you able to?" She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. "How could you harm your own family in this way?" Looking at her, this lady who had spent years choosing everyone else over me, I felt oddly at ease. "You stated long ago that they were your true family, Mom," I murmured softly. "You sat there silently the day she ruined my work presentation. The day you turned away when he called me derogatory names. They treated me like trash every time you told me to be the bigger person. They were the ones you repeatedly selected. They will now have criminal histories?" she cried. "Was it what you were looking for?" I answered, "I wanted my mother to protect me. My goal was to feel secure in my own house. The only thing I wanted was for you to pick me." After completing his task, the locksmith gave me the replacement keys. I tested them in the lock as Mom watched. "From now on, you are no longer my daughter," she declared, her voice trembling with rage. "You have no right to ruin our family in this way." For the last time, I looked at her. "The day you decided that your new spouse and his daughter were more significant than your own child, you ruined our family. I just quit allowing you all to mistreat me." She climbed into her vehicle and drove off. I entered my home, my transformed, violated home. All of my lovely plants had died from carelessness. My beloved bird of paradise was also wilted and brown. My stepsister had filled my cabinets with her belongings and reorganized everything in the kitchen. Designer clothes were all over my spare bedroom, which had been transformed into her personal closet. Later that day, the police made a call. They wanted to know whether I would file a complaint. I considered forgiveness, family loyalty, and Mom's tears. Then I recalled being gaslighted, abused, and told to just take it. "Yes," I firmly said. I wish to file charges. In a frightening email, my stepfather threatened to sue me for his daughter's psychological suffering. Without replying, I sent it to my attorney. On social media, my stepsister made evasive posts about toxic people who pretend to be victims, but I suppressed her accounts. Over the weekend, I thoroughly cleaned my house to remove any evidence of their presence. I started over after discarding the dead plants. I installed better cameras and changed all the security codes with the help of Dad and his girlfriend. Mom sent one last text last night, saying, "I hope you're happy with what you've done. I blocked her number since you've ruined everything." Fourth update. A lot has transpired since my last update, which was a few months ago. The court case proceeded more quickly than anticipated. Rather than risk a trial, both my stepsister and my stepfather accepted plea agreements. They were both placed on probation and mandated to reimburse me for the expense of replacing the locks and for the damage they caused to my residence. Above all, they have a legal obligation to avoid my property. In court, my stepsister attempted to play the victim by claiming that she was only doing what her father had told her to do and was unaware that it was against the law. The judge was unimpressed, particularly after seeing her boastful social media posts about her new house. Until the very end, my stepfather remained haughty, accusing his lawyer of being spiteful and disrespectful. Mom attended the court sessions, but she sat beside them. She never gave me a glance. She made an attempt to approach me in the parking lot following the sentencing. "Are you happy now?" she inquired. "Your stepsister has a criminal record because of you. Is this retaliation?" I felt nothing except sympathy when I looked at her, actually looked at her. "Mom, this is not retaliation. This is the result. They moved in without my consent after breaking into my house and changing my locks. How could that be acceptable?" As usual, Mom said, "She needed a place to stay." I answered, "Then you ought to have allowed her to remain with you. Or assisted her in locating a residence of her own. You decided to steal mine instead." As she normally does when she loses an argument, she breaks down in tears. "You have my undying forgiveness for this. This family has been ripped apart by you." I maintain my composure. "No, Mother. When you decided that their enjoyment was more important than my well-being years ago, you tore this family apart. I'm just at last advocating for myself. I ran into my aunt at the grocery store last week. She made an effort to guilt-trip me by claiming that Mom was having trouble adjusting to our distance from one another and that I ought to try to make amends. I informed her that some bridges must remain burned. I'm getting better sleep now. The more time passes, the less I anxiously check my phone for alerts from my new security system. The sunlight coming through my windows is helping my new plants grow. I'm going to see Dad and his girlfriend next month, and they call frequently. Out of habit, I occasionally find myself reaching for the phone to contact Mom, but the temptation is quickly squelched when I recall that night on my doorstep when I was locked out of my own house. My mother passed away years ago when she decided to prioritize her new family over me, so losing her isn't the worst part. Accepting that she will never comprehend what she did wrong is the most difficult aspect. In his last threatening email, my stepfather discussed family loyalty and how I had betrayed them through his attorney. One word was my lawyer's response. Family loyalty should have started with respecting my client's property rights. I've changed my phone number, installed cameras throughout my house, and blocked them on all platforms. This may seem extreme to others, but I'm not taking any chances in light of what they did. I've decided to sever all communication with them. Life continues. Last week, I received a promotion at work. The plants they killed are being replaced by new ones, and my garden is growing again. I recently started seeing someone who respects my limits and is aware of my trust concerns. There are some bridges that must remain burned. Sometimes severing links is the only healthy option, not just a choice. This is going to be my last update on the matter. It's time to put this chapter behind me and concentrate on starting a new life. A life free of poisonous relatives. Without being overly cautious. Without sacrificing my personal limits for those who have never honored them. I am at liberty. Am I the asshole for canceling my wedding after learning my fiancé only agreed due to family pressure and doesn't want to be a husband or father? My wedding was scheduled for last week, but I ran away the night before, so it never happened. I'm a 26-year-old woman. After 3 years of dating, I was engaged to my 26-year-old boyfriend for 6 months. Together, my now ex-fiancé and I had 2 kids. Twin boys who are 1 year old. My boyfriend was initially quite opposed to me having children, and the pregnancy wasn't planned. I was obstinate, though, and informed him that I would have them whether or not he agreed. I thought I could raise my children on my own, so I offered him the opportunity to leave and didn't even ask for child support. The time seemed appropriate for me, and I've always had a strong mother instinct. I was prepared to become a mother. He initially objected, attempting to convince me to end the pregnancy. I made it plain that I would end our relationship if he persisted in pressing me. It was then that he appeared to change his mind. He was a supportive spouse during the pregnancy and a good parent to our sons when they were born. I'll admit that I might not have been able to handle it alone, and we hadn't anticipated twins. I considered myself fortunate that he stayed. I accepted his proposal 6 months after the birth of our sons. It seemed as though he had never previously objected to the pregnancy. I was ready to forgive and go on because he had been so lovely and encouraging. After 3 years of dating and the birth of our first child, it seemed appropriate to tie the knot. We spent months organizing the wedding, and I was truly delighted. My parents, who really liked my ex-fiancé, were also overjoyed. He appeared to be the ideal man. However, everything fell apart the night before the wedding. I suppose it rescued me from what could have been a terrible marriage, but it's hard to imagine that one phone call could end a 3-year relationship. As is traditional, my ex-fiancé and I were staying apart the day before our wedding. He was at his family's house a few blocks away, and I was at our house. He called me after supper to let me know that he was eager to marry me and that he loved me. His remarks moved me to tears. I waited for him to hang up after we said our goodbyes and enjoyed a sweet moment on the phone. Regretfully, or luckily, maybe, he neglected to end the call. I believe that, contrary to his usual practice, he did not press the screen firmly enough. I chose to listen in on their chat because I was curious and could hear his father's voice, so I stayed on the line. He was recently asked by his father if he had been speaking to me. My ex sounded glum and aloof when he responded to his father. I knew right away that something wasn't right. Even though a week has gone by, the events that followed are constantly replayed in my mind. He replied in the affirmative when his father inquired if he still felt the same as he had 2 days prior. His mother then entered the discussion and advised him to proceed with the wedding regardless of his feelings. My boyfriend appeared to lose his temper a bit and told his parents that they couldn't treat him this way and that he would do whatever he pleased. In response, his father said that although they couldn't make him marry someone he didn't love, they could remove him from their family, therefore it was up to him to decide. Then his mother spoke up, telling him that he had to mature and become responsible now that he was a father. She said that although it was already terrible that he had children before marriage, he could still turn things around by getting married rather than delaying it because he didn't feel ready. She believed that if he was prepared to have children, he was also prepared to commit to marriage. His dad felt the same way she did. My ex started to object, claiming that it was unfair that he was being forced to wed me merely to avoid being kicked out of their relationship. He bemoaned how no one in his life appeared to care if he was prepared for milestones or not, and he accused them of being unjust. He claimed that he always had to deal with situations for which he was unprepared. He complained that his parents, who had made him stay with me in spite of his anxieties about becoming a dad, and I didn't give a damn about whether he was ready to be a father. Even though he still didn't feel ready, they were now pressuring him to be married. He persisted in griping about how unfair he was being treated by everyone. After that, I believe he left his phone in the room and rushed out. When I eventually hung up, his parents were still talking about how careless their son was. I was dumbfounded and unsure of what to do. Only after his parents threatened to divorce him against their will did my boyfriend agree to marry me and live with me. I certainly did not anticipate finding out about this the evening before our wedding. I sat in shock for the next 5 minutes. His actions had not shown that he wasn't prepared. He had always been a good parent and boyfriend, even though we had a fight when I told him I was expecting. I was unaware that these were his actual emotions. There's no denying that he was a brilliant performer. I made the decision to flee as soon as I was able to gather myself. I was lucky to have my children with me. A little out of town, I got into my car and drove to a hotel. By the time I got there, it was late, and my children were being grumpy. Without providing an explanation, I blocked my partner and his family after putting them to sleep. That was it. Knowing that the previous year had been nothing more than a massive lie, I sobbed all night long. Around 4 a.m., I finally dozed off. My ex's parents had paid for the wedding location and all other expenses. I didn't care about the money being spent because they were affluent. After all, they had come up with the entire notion. The 3 of them could handle the fallout. I texted all of my friends and family to let them know that the wedding was off and that I would explain everything tonight before I went to bed. I didn't give any more information. I told everyone not to respond to any messages from my ex or his family, nor should they go near them. I knew my people would follow my instructions without question because I trusted them. I ate my feelings and played with my sons, who were the only people I wanted around me at the time, at the hotel on the day I was meant to get married. Even though I was heartbroken and devastated, I had to put up a brave front for their benefit, and I did just that. I made the decision to return home after taking a day off in order to get my belongings and leave the house. I had already dropped my children off at my parents' house. A day later, I eventually made it to the house, and my ex's reaction was precisely what I had anticipated. I'm still not sure how much of his panicked, worried appearance was real and how much was an act. He appeared to have lost sleep. He said he had been quite concerned about me and asked me where I had been. He went on a tirade about how he and his family had waited for hours on the wedding day without waiting for me to answer. He claimed that I owed them an explanation and a public apology because of what I did, which was unacceptable. Cold feet was no justification, he said, for degrading him and his family in this manner. I said very little. I only informed him that I had just overheard him talking to his folks. For a few seconds, he appeared perplexed, but when he understood what I was talking about, he had the good sense to appear embarrassed. After that, I didn't bother to speak with him or provide any more explanation. He waited outside in the yard while I entered the house. Without saying another word, I gathered my necessities and departed. To be honest, I didn't know what to say to him. I was doing what I believed to be right, and he was doing what he believed to be right. I had lost interest in being a wife. Being a good mother was all I wanted. We hadn't spoken since that nearly a week ago. I believed it to be our demise. I had run out of things to say to him, and he appeared to agree. Or so I believed. He arrived at my parents' house a few hours ago and begged to talk to me. My parents and all of my close friends were aware of what had transpired at this point. Despite my parents' skepticism, I consented to have one final conversation with him. Since the babies had just gone to sleep, I didn't want us fighting or screaming and waking them up, so I didn't let him in. We conversed in the front yard instead. Even though he doesn't feel ready to marry me just yet, he told me he genuinely loves me and apologized for everything he had done to me. He added that he still wants to be a part of our lives and that he loves the children in spite of what he said that evening. I was at a loss for words. Since he had been deceiving me and being phony for about a year, I wasn't sure whether I could trust him again. I was skeptical, of course. Nevertheless, I promised him I would consider my options. He stated that instead of ending things, he wants to try to make things better and give us another chance, free from his parents' meddling. To be honest, I have no idea how to respond to that. Even though I want my children to grow up with their father, I simply cannot trust him at this time. Personally, I could really use a vacation because this week has been really hectic. What if I choose not to give our relationship another chance? That's what I'm left wondering. First update. Hello everyone, I realize it has been a long, but I haven't had time to update you because I've been so busy with work, kids, and moving out. I'm incredibly appreciative of all the love and guidance I've received, and the support has been tremendous. It has been tremendously beneficial throughout this difficult period. Yes, I have discussed custody arrangements with a lawyer. I've made the decision not to reconcile with my ex, thus I want exclusive custody of my children. It was absurd and judgmental of some people to send me harsh texts calling me a selfish mother for even thinking about getting back together with him. In addition to being a mother, I'm a human. Only a week had passed since that phone conversation, and naturally, I still hadn't moved on. After all, it had been a 3-year relationship. I thought about giving him another chance for a moment, but I was emotional because I truly did love him. But today, I feel a lot more stable. I understand that regardless of how I feel about the circumstance, I must prioritize my children and myself. There is no way to get back together with him. All of that hatred and condemnation wasn't necessary in the first place, but I should have anticipated it given that this is the internet. 2 days after calling off the wedding, I began searching for a lawyer. Finding someone I completely trusted and felt at ease with took some time. Because we never imagined this day would arrive, my ex and I had never talked about custody arrangements. I must now take legal action to make sure that no one can take my children away from me. I'm not sure about his parents, but I don't think my ex would even want custody. Given how traditional and conservative they are, I have no doubt that they would be upset if their son were denied custody of their grandchildren. I'm getting ready for any pushback they may give me. My ex and I haven't communicated since our last conversation, which was 3 days ago. This demonstrates to me that his statements about wishing to resolve the conflict were untrue and pointless. He hasn't followed up on me, even though he should have if he really wanted to make things work. I'm certain that not pursuing him again is the right course of action. I won't be with a man who doesn't sincerely want to be with me, and there is no trust left between us. It's great this way. The last thing I need on my plate right now is for him to become upset over the custody arrangement, so I'm going to let him know my decision shortly and hope he doesn't. Second update. Finally, I told my ex that I didn't want to reunite with him and that, just to let him know, I would be requesting full custody. I thought he would be okay with it. He should have been appreciative that I wasn't pressuring him into something for which he wasn't ready because, after all, he acknowledged that he wasn't ready for marriage or children. He didn't, however, take it well. He began to argue with me, claiming that I was unable to harm him in this way. He said that although I could end our relationship if I so desired, I couldn't take his children away from him. Now, if our relationship had been normal, that would have made sense, but it isn't. My ex didn't want children in the first place, as you are fully aware. He wasn't prepared to become a parent until a week ago, but all of a sudden he was battling for custody of the children. I was certain that something was wrong and that his parents were probably still attempting to manipulate him. We were at a restaurant, and I was feeling really ashamed about the commotion he was creating, so I tried to calm him down as he was panicked throughout our argument. He eventually became a little more composed after some time. I couldn't afford a protracted custody dispute, so I made the decision to try to talk sense into his head. I lacked the funds and motivation to do it. Additionally, I was aware that his parents could hire the top attorneys, so even if I had the moral superiority, they might prolong the proceedings. Reasoning with him and hoping he wouldn't argue with me was my best course of action. I informed him that until a week ago, he had been claiming he wasn't prepared for children. I clarified that this was the best course of action for everyone. He could live his life as he pleased, free from the burdens of marriage and children, and I would take care of the children, which was what I wanted anyhow. It seemed like the only sensible course of action because I believed it was what he also wanted. He surprised me by telling me that he had changed his mind and felt prepared to become a father. It simply did not stack up. His declaration that he was prepared just strengthened my thoughts that something more was going on. He couldn't have abruptly changed his mind in a week if he hadn't felt prepared to become a father for a full year. He eventually told me the truth when I asked him if there was anything he wasn't telling me. His parents were responsible. Surprise, surprise. He had gone to his parents after I informed him I knew everything and the wedding was put off. They instructed him to swiftly put me straight. He came up to me a week later for that reason. His parents claimed that although they had come to terms with the fact that I would not wed him because it was now beyond their control, they would not allow him to lose custody of their grandchildren. If he didn't persuade me to accept shared custody, they threatened to cut him off once more. He was virtually pleading with me to accept a joint custody agreement at this time. I simply left because I was so repulsed. It was unbelievable to me that he was dancing to his parents' music once more. I had given him a free pass, but he was still unable to make up his mind. He wanted his parents' money more than he wanted to commit to me or become a father. I didn't want him near our children if that was his only concern. They were worthy of better. I didn't want him in my life or my children's lives in any way, therefore I didn't even want child support. He was obviously lacking in moral character and would stop at nothing to maintain his parents' favor. It was pitiful. I've blocked him everywhere once more in the days that have passed. I don't want to see or speak with him. In his final message to me, he suggested that we agree to share custody and that if his parents died, he would divide his inheritance with me. It's unbelievable that he's actually putting forward this absurdity for no other reason. I suppose this is my punishment for first falling for a pampered brat. I am a self-made lady who has risen through the ranks on my own. Although my parents did fund my education, we didn't have a lot of money. I had to work really hard for what I have now since I had to rely on scholarships to pay for college. My ex is the only son of parents who are very well off. You all know the type, so I doubt I need to elaborate. When he started dating me, I felt he had changed, and he really convinced me that he had. However, I was mistaken. He fooled me for a good 3 years, which proves he's a brilliant actor. I don't want to stay to find out more now that I can finally see him for who he really is. I'm finished. I have no problem raising my children by myself. A parent who doesn't even want to be a father is no better than any other father. I'm positive now that I made the right choice. Instead of turning this into a protracted custody dispute, I just hope he realizes his mistake and revokes his parental rights. I will continue to pray. Third update. Hi everyone, I'm here to finally tell you all some wonderful news. Although I've been quite busy, I realize it's been a while since my last update. First things first, I now live in a much smaller apartment with my babies, but it's mine at least. This house is really mine, unlike the one my ex and I shared. My parents can occasionally visit to help with the kids because it's close to their place. Since I obviously can't stop working, I've also hired a full-time babysitter to help me. I am extremely fortunate to be able to purchase this at this time. I am quite appreciative of my parents' financial support as well. They're trying their hardest, but none of us anticipated this. I consider myself lucky to have parents that are so devoted and encouraging. Now for the section about my ex that I know most people are interested in. He gave up his parental rights by signing. My best assumption is that either his parents gave up or he eventually stood up to them. I'm not sure what changed. I assume it's the former because a friend told me he moved out of their residence. A few days ago, he expressed regret to me and even offered to reimburse me financially. However, I had no intention of accepting money from my former partner. I don't care that some of you may believe that was a bad choice. When I stated that I no longer wanted to interact with him, I wasn't joking. I forgive him, but that doesn't mean I have to pay him back. All I want to do is go on. Without his assistance, my parents and I are more than capable of parenting my children. I responded to his text by telling him everything was okay but requesting that he stop contacting me. He has so far respected that. Giving my children the greatest life possible is my top priority right now. I no longer have the time to be depressed or upset about my ex. The only thing that counts to me is being the greatest mother I can be for my kids. Cast out by my family for favoring my golden child. Sister, my aunt helped me. Now they seek my help. Am I the asshole for refusing? My life was completely upended 10 years ago when my family, particularly my sister Claire, chose to exclude me from the house. Why? I was viewed as a traitor by them since I managed to pay for my college education without their assistance. I had nowhere to go when I was 18 and ready to start college. All of this was made possible by Claire, the golden child, who consistently made me seem unimportant in contrast. Claire was my favorite from a young age, yet she is 4 years older than I am. She was the object of my parents' obsession. They would practically hold a celebration if she received an A. You understand what I mean when I say, "Oh, cool. What's for dinner?" When I receive an A. My parents treated Claire like a prodigy by the time she left for a prestigious business school. They covered everything, including her expensive clothes, condo, and tuition. I kept my head down in the meanwhile, knowing that I would have to work things out on my own. Upon being admitted to a prominent UK college to study history, I had the hope that I may receive some assistance. However, no. I was told directly by my parents that they were unable to pay for my education. Although I recognized the high cost of college, their refusal to even co-sign a loan really infuriated me. I only asked them to help me escape a lifetime of debt, not to cover everything. However, they declined. Their logic? They were also hoping to launch a small business at the time, so it seems that all of their resources were going toward that. We already paid for Claire's college. We have to think about our future now. I was stuck. When it came to me, my parents were all about being frugal and responsible. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to attend this college, but it felt like they were purposefully creating barriers for me. My parents had no difficulty spending a lot of money on Claire. I had no choice but to ask my Aunt Denise. My dad's older sister, Denise, is the total antithesis of my parents. In addition to being a brilliant neurosurgeon, she is also quite grounded. There was always this strange tension between her and my parents. They would pretend to be kind at family get-togethers, but it was obvious they were angry with her success. Especially my dad detested being overshadowed by her. At first, I didn't want to engage Denise, but I had to. I contacted her to see if she might cover my tuition. She made no hesitation at all. Of course, I'll help. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I was afraid my father would learn. He would go crazy if he found out that I had asked Denise for money behind his back. I therefore pleaded with Denise to keep it a secret. I believed I was safe for a while. I had paid my tuition and was preparing to go to school. Claire then made the decision to sabotage everything. I'm still not sure how she learned that I had asked Aunt Denise for assistance, but she did. And because she was Claire, she had to make it into a tremendous, dramatic ordeal rather than simply letting it go. I felt something wasn't right the moment I got home from a night out with some pals. Everything I owned was put in boxes. My books, my clothes, even my bed linens. Claire was standing there with this smug, self-satisfied expression on her face as my parents were seated in the living room. I had the impression that I had entered a perverse intervention. My father wasted no time. I had no idea what he was talking about, so I looked at the stack of papers he threw at me and said, "Explain this." I became aware that Claire had completely lost her mind at that point. She had created fictitious emails between Aunt Denise and me, giving the impression that I was betraying the family by disclosing information about their business plans in return for Denise covering my tuition. My eyes were unbelievable. In order to make it appear as though I had betrayed my family, Claire had combed through my laptop, discovered actual emails between Denise and me, and altered them using Photoshop or another program. I was taken aback. My parents refused to listen to me when I tried to explain that it was all a lie. No matter what I replied, they continued to say, "We trusted you, and you stabbed us in the back." They obviously believed Claire. She was always believed by them. It seemed as though I had vanished from the world. They instructed me to immediately collect my belongings and depart. I told a total lie, which led to my official expulsion from the house. I pleaded with them to think again. Aunt Denise had already promised to cover my tuition, so I didn't want to put her through any more trouble. My parents, however, were unconcerned. They claimed they didn't want to interact with me and labeled me a traitor. That was it. I only had a few boxes of my belongings and the clothing on my back when I fled. Aunt Denise took me in. To be honest, I'm not sure how I would have managed without her. She immediately took me in and showed me the kind of family I hadn't experienced in years. Denise was the only person who truly cared about me while my parents were preoccupied with their future business and worshiping Claire. I will always be thankful for that. But even today, I can't get rid of the memories of that night. Claire standing there with that arrogant expression on her face, knowing she had won, my parents staring at me like I was a criminal, and all of my belongings packed away when I walked into my house. I was standing on Aunt Denise's doorstep, my life in boxes, having been evicted from my own home. I was still trying to figure out what the hell had occurred. It like a nightmare. In a single night, how does one go from feeling like a member of a family to experiencing homelessness? Even though the entire situation seemed bizarre, I couldn't claim to be all that shocked. Although my parents had always made it apparent that Claire came first, I never imagined it would go this far. Being the angel that she is, Denise embraced me wholeheartedly. She didn't pry or ask a lot of questions. She simply told me that her house was mine for however long I needed it after realizing how hurt I was. That type of generosity, man, it really got to me because I knew at that moment that I had never experienced anything like that from my own parents. I thus took up residence with Aunt Denise. Initially, waking up in her guest room and seeing a house that wasn't mine felt weird. But as time went on, it began to feel more like home than the location where I was raised. As we talked about everything, we got closer. As it happens, I had no idea how much Aunt Denise knew about my parents' actions. For years, she had avoided them and only attended family gatherings out of duty. She revealed to me something that completely shocked me. My father had harbored animosity toward her long before I was even born. It had always been Denise's turn. She attended medical school, married a wonderful man who tragically died young, and created a wonderful life. My dad was doing all right in the meantime, but he constantly felt like she was taking center stage. He was strangely competitive whenever they met. According to Denise, their relationship had basically devolved into a contest to see who could appear more attractive to the other members of the family. However, my dad hated his sister rather than being proud of her. And it wasn't just about jobs. He felt dominated in practically every aspect of life, including money and society. Denise suspected that my parents' treatment of me had been influenced by their jealousy. Denise knew all of this years ago, but she chose to remain silent so as not to aggravate me. She told me everything now that I lived with her. She seemed to be filling in all the blanks in my life that had never made sense, like why my parents always went out of their way for Claire and why they never seemed to care what I did. It all came down to a strange family dynamic that I was completely unaware of. Although it was wonderful living with Denise, I was unable to fully unwind. I kept expecting my parents to call, for Claire to suddenly appear, or for them to say they were sorry. Naturally though, that never took place. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. Not a single phone call, no text. I was initially incensed. How could they just ignore me as if I didn't exist? But eventually the rage subsided and I became numb. My brain seemed to be turning off all of my feelings so that I could continue to function. But Denise was fantastic. Unless I wanted to, Mom never forced me to discuss what had happened. She gave me time to think things through. She even made sure I had all I needed before I departed for the UK by helping me organize everything for school. I honestly don't know how I would have survived that period of time if it weren't for her. However, despite her backing, my parents' silence was terrible. You would think they would at least check in on your child after evicting them. However, no. A part of me still had expectations, even though I suppose I shouldn't have. Claire texted me about a month after the entire incident. It was just as annoying as she was, which is why I can still clearly recall it. The only thing it said was, "Hope you're doing okay. By the way, don't leave your laptop lying around." That was it. She reminded me that she was the reason I was expelled, but she made no attempt to apologize or acknowledge what she had done. As I gazed at the television, my blood began to boil. Simply put, she was making fun of me. I didn't answer. What was the purpose? There was nothing that made Claire feel bad. She thought that she had won some strange family game. I considered responding with a sarcastic text, but I realized it wouldn't change anything. She would simply relish the attention. After blocking her number, I made an effort to move on. It wasn't simple. A part of me was still hoping for a message from my parents every time I checked my phone. It could have been a passive-aggressive email from my dad acting as though nothing had occurred, or it could have been a message from my mom apologizing for everything. However, there was radio silence. Denise and I developed a strong routine in the months that followed. She evolved into more than simply my aunt. She became my companion, confidant, and essentially my sole remaining relative. I began to see how dysfunctional my parents truly were. They had devoted so much of their time to making Claire into the ideal daughter that they had neglected everything else. And it would be too late for them to correct it when Claire made a mistake, which she would eventually do. As I was preparing to leave for school, I received a second message, this one from my father. The message was brief and straightforward. Good luck in the UK. That was it. No explanation, no apology, nothing. It was like being slapped across the face. All he had to say after everything was, good luck. I didn't even know how to react, so I didn't. I tried not to worry about it and simply erased the message. Denise took me to the airport the day I departed for the UK. She gave me a firm hug and expressed her pride in me, saying she knew I would succeed. Those words, spoken to me by a member of my family for the first time in my life, struck me more strongly than I had anticipated. I felt as though I was leaving behind more than just my house when I boarded that plane. I was leaving behind the aspect of myself that had always aimed for my parents' favor. I made the decision that I no longer needed them after that. I had myself, I had Denise, and I had my future. I wasn't going to waste any more energy chasing after people who obviously didn't care about me, but if they wanted to get in touch, that's okay. I was finished. The UK was a terrific place to live. I made some friends, adapted to college life, and stopped worrying about my family all the time for the first time in years. Although I can't claim to have forgotten about them, I can say that I wasn't thinking about them as much. I was concentrating on my education, planning for the future, and simply attempting to live a life free from the stress of being my parents' shadow. Naturally, though, something had to happen and ruin everything just as everything was going well. I came back to my hometown after graduation, got a fantastic, well-paying job, and then my mother called. Yes, my mother. The same woman who had stopped talking to me ever since I was expelled. It came as a complete surprise. My phone buzzed while I was reviewing some notes for a paper in my dorm room. For a while, I thought I was seeing things when I saw her name appear. My thoughts were racing as I gazed at the television. Do I have to respond to it? Disregard it? Why was she calling me now, after all that had transpired? I gave it a few more rings. Then I took up, against my better judgment. Hello, I answered, attempting to sound composed despite my racing heart. She was unsure of what to say, as seen by the delay on the other end. At last she spoke something. Hey. It's your mom. Who else would it be, really? However, I didn't say that. After nearly 2 years of silence, I simply waited for her to explain why she was calling. After hesitating once again, she abruptly stated, we need to talk. I couldn't resist laughing. She wanted to talk now? After all? It was really normal for her. However, despite my annoyance, I had a natural curiosity. Why was she contacting me after all this time, and what could possibly be so important? How about, I asked in the most neutral tone I could. She stammered as though she was trying to find the perfect way to say it. Your father and I, we want to see you? I could clearly see the direction of this. They didn't want to see me because they felt awful for throwing me out or because they missed me. They were in need of something and I was very certain of what it was. Why? I asked directly. Her delayed response just strengthened my suspicions. Her voice was quieter when she did talk, as if she was attempting to appear worried and maternal. I've been going through a difficult period with your dad. The pandemic has made things difficult. The true cause for the call was there. It was precisely what I had anticipated, financial difficulties. I knew their business wasn't doing well, but I hadn't heard much about it since I left. Denise had stated in passing that their shop wasn't doing as well as they had hoped, and it made sense that they were having trouble given the pandemic. But after everything they had done to me, I wasn't going to step in and save them. All right. And, I spoke in a flat tone, I had no intention of making things simple for her. She began, your sister, Claire, has been taking care of things for us, but... I interrupted her at that point. Knowing where this was going, I said, let me guess. Claire messed everything up. Her response was sufficient, but there was a lengthy gap on her end. Claire had messed it up, of course. I had no idea why they were taken aback. She always cared more about how she looked than about putting in the effort. It was backfiring. They had trusted her with everything. My mother drew a breathless gasp. She said, "Things haven't been going as planned. And we require assistance." I chuckled. I was unable to resist. They wanted my assistance after everything, after kicking me out, interrupting me, and allowing Claire to run me over? It was unbelievable how bold it all was. Unbelievable, I whispered to myself. "What's so amusing?" my mother inquired, as though she was truly perplexed and couldn't comprehend why I wasn't seizing the opportunity to intervene and save the day. "Are you serious? Do you genuinely believe that I will assist you?" I said, raising my voice. All the feelings I had been suppressing for the last 2 years were rising to the surface, and I could feel the rage rising. Her voice faltered as she said, "We are your parents. We were not perfect, but however, we require you." Even though she couldn't see me, I shook my head. "Mom, you weren't simply making mistakes. I was ejected from the house by you. You trusted Claire's falsehoods about your own child. You need me now that we haven't spoken in years? And all of a sudden, I'm expected to abandon everything and run?" After then, she was silent. She was clearly unsure of what to say. She most likely wasn't used to me advocating for myself in this way. I would have just followed their instructions when I was still living at home in the hopes that it would maintain harmony. However, it is no longer the case. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me again because I had changed. She spoke at last, but her voice was different. She no longer made an effort to sound kind. She now sounded annoyed, as if she was surprised that I was being so challenging. Sharply, she remarked, "We're still your family. That is at least how much you owe us." The last straw was that. I responded icily, "I owe you absolutely nothing. Go ask Claire for aid if you need it. Remember that she's your golden child?" I hung up the phone without waiting for her answer. Even though my hands were shaking and my heart was racing, I experienced an odd sensation of relief. At last, I had expressed what I needed to. I wasn't going to help them sort out their mess. They could do it alone. I informed Aunt Denise about the situation over the phone that evening. She wasn't shocked in the least. She remarked, "They have been depending on Claire for years. It was only a question of time until everything caught up with them." After a lengthy conversation, I was even more convinced that I had made the proper choice. My parents were now suffering because they had favored Claire above me. Even though that seemed harsh, I wasn't responsible for correcting their errors. I felt free for the first time in a long time. I didn't require their acceptance or approval. I wasn't going to allow them to drag me back into their toxic mess now that I had my own life. I had survived their betrayal, therefore I had done my part. It was their time to face the repercussions now. First update. After that phone conversation with my mother, I believed that the family drama was over. To be honest, I was pleased with the way things turned out. At last, I had defended myself and stated unequivocally that I would not serve as their safety net. I assumed they would simply give up and resume relying on Claire. However, I didn't account for my sister's capacity to stir things up. Claire wasn't going to let me get away with it, of course. Something strange happened around 2 weeks after my mom and I spoke on the phone. A knock on the door interrupted my otherwise uneventful Saturday afternoon while I was tidying up around my house. I don't get many visits anymore. I was a little perplexed because I live alone and the most of my friends know to text before they visit. When I peered through the peephole, guess who was there? Yes, Claire. I briefly believed that I might be seeing things. Why had she come here? With the exception of that one dumb text concerning my laptop, she hadn't spoken to me in years, so why was she now showing up at my door as if nothing had happened? Although my first instinct was to ignore her, I knew Claire well enough to know that she would stay until she achieved her goals. Before I could say anything, she grinned as if we were best friends as I opened the door. "Hey," she exclaimed, sounding vivacious and phony. "A long time has passed." I was totally unprepared and just stared at her for a moment. "Yes, it has. Claire, what are you doing here?" She had this incredibly charming look on her face as if she believed she could win me back with charm. She tilted her head slightly and continued, "I wanted to talk. May I enter?" I remained in the doorway with my arms crossed. "How about?" I asked, trying to sound as impartial as I could. For a moment, her smile wavered, but she immediately got it back. She tried to seem nonchalant as she said, "Come on. Maybe we should just speak inside?" It's crucial. I ought to have declined. I ought to have told her to go at that very moment. However, my curiosity overcame me. I didn't bother making her feel welcome, but I moved aside to let her in. I didn't ask if she wanted something to drink, and I didn't offer her a seat. After everything she had done, she was fortunate that I was still allowing her to enter my space. As she entered, she seemed to be taking in the space. She seemed to be trying to strike up a conversation when she said, "Nice apartment." I didn't answer. I wasn't here to make friends. "All right, Claire," I responded, cutting right to the chase. "What are you looking for?" She let out a loud sigh as if she was already worn out from the game she was playing. She folded her arms and replied, "Mom told me about your conversation. You know, she's pretty upset." I arched an eyebrow. "Angry?" "Claire, she threw me out of the house." "What is it that she must be upset about?" As if I were the one acting irrationally, Claire rolled her eyes. "Look, I'm not here to go over anything again. Both of us are aware that you have always been challenging." The casualness with which she said that nearly made me chuckle. "Hard," I said it again. "Are you for real now? To get me expelled from the residence, you made up emails. Is that challenging?" She dismissively waved her hand. "That's from long ago. I came here in order to put things right." Uncertain if I had heard her correctly, I blinked. "Would you like to put things right?" I asked, my words brimming with doubt. She nodded as if this were the most logical thing ever. "Yeah," she answered. "I think it's time to move past the family issues, even though I realize they got complicated and I may have overreacted at the time." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "Do you believe that you overreacted?" I spoke, straining to maintain a steady tone. "You ruined my relationship with our parents, Claire. You misled them and said lies about me, and now you're just standing here acting as if it doesn't even matter." I noticed that she was growing irritated as her smile dimmed a bit. "Remember, I didn't come here to dispute. I came to ask for your assistance." Finally, I realized why she was actually at my apartment. Claire wasn't here to apologize or make amends, of course. I had to give her something. My jaw tightened as I gazed at her, anticipating her next move. Finally letting go of the artificial sweetness, she stated, "I've been trying to keep the business going. However, it has been somewhat difficult. We were severely affected by the pandemic, and even though I'm doing everything I can, it's not enough. We are in danger of losing everything, even though Mom and Dad don't want to acknowledge it." With no pity in my heart, I crossed my arms. "I'm going to assume that you want me to help you out." Claire made an uncomfortable move. With defensiveness, she stated, "I'm not asking for a handout. I simply believe that we might be able to work something out together. I take it you're doing well for yourself? I assumed you would like to assist the family." She was unbelievable to me. She was attempting to use remorse to persuade me to save the family business, which she had destroyed. "You figured incorrectly," I replied bluntly. Claire blinked, obviously unprepared for that reaction. "What do you mean?" "Wait," I said firmly. "I mean, I'm not helping you. Not after all of what you have done. Claire, you destroyed my life. Now that you're in difficulty, you expect me to forget that I turned my own parents against me and come to your aid? Number?" She looked at me in disbelief. Claire was at a loss for words for the first time in her life. "But, we're family," she murmured haltingly, her confidence fading a bit. I gave a headshake. "We stopped being family the day you made it your mission to destroy me." Claire's expression turned pale. I could tell she was having trouble processing the fact that she wasn't used to hearing no. She stood up after a long awkward quiet. "Fine," she answered icily. "If that's how you want it." Saying, "That's how it's going to be." I refused to listen. "You made your choices, Claire. Now you have to deal with the consequences." She slammed the door behind her and ran out of the apartment without saying another word. I let the strain out of me for a minute as I stood there. I felt guilty, as if I had been too severe. However, that remorse quickly vanished as I realized everything she had done to me. I felt like I was in charge of my life for the first time in years. Claire's shadow no longer surrounded me. I wasn't the scapegoat or the second best option. At last, I was free of it all. Second update. After Claire stormed out of my apartment, I assumed that everything would die down and that she would finally realize that I was done with her and the whole family drama. Naturally, though, I didn't realize how obstinate she might be. The subsequent wave didn't even arrive a week later. Claire wasn't the one who knocked on my door this time. Both of my parents were involved. Funny how these things usually seem to happen on my days off, and it was a Saturday once more. The knock came as I was browsing through my phone while seated on the couch. And it wasn't soft. The knock was one of those loud, persistent ones that indicates the person on the other end isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I stood up, immediately suspecting who it might be. My mother and father were standing together like a united front when I opened the door. My dad appeared uneasy, as if he didn't want to be there. However, my mother? She was determined to clean up whatever mess had been caused, even if it took using force to get through it, according to the expression in her eye. I leaned against the doorframe and sighed. What do you want? I suppose my mother was trying to maintain a nice demeanor when she smiled at me. Can we come in and talk? We need to sort some things out. I wanted to slam the door in their faces, but I reasoned that they would simply keep coming if I didn't let them in immediately. So I sighed loudly and moved aside to let them in. As they entered, they looked about as if they were expecting something more than a simple apartment. My mom immediately headed for the couch, sitting down and stroking the seat next to her as if I were a small child she was attempting to comfort, while my dad remained silent. I crossed my arms and replied bluntly, "I'll stand." "All right," she responded, her smile taut. "Look, we know things have been difficult between us," I said again, raising an eyebrow. "Difficult? That's what you're calling it?" When my dad did speak, it was in a rough, low voice. "We didn't come here to argue." Without even trying to disguise my annoyance, I questioned. "Then what did you come here for?" "Because I'm pretty sure we've already been over everything. Claire tried, you tried, and I made myself clear, I'm not helping." My mother's smile faltered a bit. She most likely wasn't used to me responding in this manner. She leaned forward a little and continued, "That's not why we're here. We're here because we want to apologize." It nearly made me chuckle. Apologize? For what, exactly? Kicking me out? Believing Claire's lies? Or was it that you didn't even bother checking in on me for 2 years? My dad shifted uneasily, as if he would rather be somewhere else than here, and my mom's face hardened. They obviously didn't anticipate me shoving it back in their faces in that manner. My mother added, "We know we made mistakes," in a softer tone. "But we're family, and family has to stick together." I could sense that I was getting impatient. It was just the same thing again. They would whip out the family card as if it were meant to wipe out all the bad things that had transpired. This time, though, I wasn't going to fall for it. I stated rather plainly, "You guys are only here because you need something from me. If things hadn't gone south with the business, I wouldn't even be hearing from you. Let's not pretend this is about family." There was silence for a while. When my dad did finally speak, it was in a rougher but more honest voice than I had heard him in years. "You're right." I was surprised by that. I stared at him and blinked. "What?" "You're right," he said again, letting out a deep sigh. "We screwed up. We believed Claire. We pushed you out, and we didn't even think twice about it. And now, well, now things are falling apart, and we're desperate." I was at a loss for words. I didn't think he would be clean about it. In contrast, my mother appeared to be attempting to maintain her composure. She obviously hadn't anticipated that he would simply put everything out that way. I added, "I appreciate the honesty," following a lengthy silence. "But that doesn't change anything." Then, with a sharper voice, my mother interrupted. "It doesn't change the fact that we need you, and you owe us, after everything we've done for you." Once more, that feeling of entitlement was present. They genuinely thought that simply because they were my parents, I owed them something, as if the years of disregard and partiality had no bearing, and that I should help them out now that they were having problems. "I don't owe you anything," I stated icily. "Not after the way you treated me. You made your choice when you believed Claire over me, when you threw me out and didn't even check if I was okay. Now you want me to save you? That's not how this works." My father remained silent. He just sat there looking shamefully at the floor. "However, my mother?" She had not finished yet. She raised her voice and shouted, "We're your parents. We raised you, we took care of you, and now you're just going to abandon us?" I nearly felt terrible for her now, so I shook my head. "You didn't take care of me. Aunt Denise did. You chose Claire, and now you're stuck with her. That's on you." My mom looked like she was going to blow up, but my dad stopped her before she could say anything by placing a hand on her arm. For the first time since they entered, he looked me in the eye as he got to his feet. He answered, "We understand," in a steady but dejected tone. "We're not going to push you anymore. We just needed to try." I nearly felt sorry for him for a moment. That sympathy vanished though, when I realized all they had done to me. I said, "I hope you figure it out," and moved to open the door for them. "But I'm not going to be part of it." My father gave a nod, as if he had anticipated it, but my mother gave me one final glance, part indignant, half begging. However, she got up and followed him out when she realized I wasn't going anywhere. I shut the door after them and stood there for a while, allowing the silence to descend. I had succeeded? For the first time, I felt truly free since I had finally confronted them.